The courtroom was eerily quiet, save for the faint murmur of hushed voices and the shuffle of papers. It was a typical day in Judge Rebecca Hall's courtroom. The kind of day that followed the regular rhythm of legal proceedings, a world of precise arguments, poised lawyers, and emotional testimonies. Judge Hall had presided over countless cases, from minor infractions to life-altering lawsuits. She had seen it all. But nothing could have prepared her for today. The bailiff, a tall, no-nonsense man named Thomas, suddenly stood at attention, his hand gripping the edge of the podium. "All rise," he announced. The crowd immediately stood, the silence hanging heavily in the air. Judge Hall adjusted her glasses, preparing for another day of standard legal work. But as she looked toward the door, something caught her eye. A figure stood in the doorway, a figure that seemed out of place in the sea of suits and ties that typically filled the courtroom. Elon Musk. The tech mogul, dressed in his usual black suit and a simple white shirt, strode into the room with the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to making headlines. His presence was impossible to ignore. The room shifted, whispers rippling like a wave through the crowd. How could he be here? This was no ordinary corporate lawsuit or tech negotiation. This was a legal battle in the heart of the judicial system. Judge Hall's hand froze midair as she was about to sit down, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. She had known Musk's name, of course. Who hadn't? The billionaire CEO of SpaceX and Tesla, the visionary behind a future few dared to imagine. But this wasn't a corporate boardroom, this was her courtroom, a place of logic and procedure, not a stage for Silicon Valley's most notorious figure. "Mr. Musk," she said, her voice measured, but there was a flicker of surprise beneath it. "This is unexpected." Musk smiled, the same confident, enigmatic smile that had made him a media darling. "I understand this is out of the ordinary, Judge Hall, but I assure you, I'm here for the trial, just like everyone else." "Very well," Judge Hall said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Please, take your seat." Musk nodded, moving with a casual elegance, as if walking into a boardroom rather than a place where the lives of individuals were up for discussion. His eyes, sharp and calculating, flicked around the room, scanning the courtroom as if analyzing it like a new model rocket. He was used to having the world in the palm of his hand. But today, he was no longer the head of a tech empire, he was just another defendant in a legal battle that could change the course of his business and personal life forever. As the trial began, the tension in the room was palpable. The lawyers for both sides exchanged formalities, introducing their clients and laying out the stakes of the case. It was a corporate dispute, but the involvement of Musk elevated it to something far more high-profile. Everyone in the room, from the legal experts to the journalists scribbling furiously at their desks, could sense it. This wasn't just about the case at hand, it was about what Elon Musk represented. The opposing lawyer, a seasoned attorney named Robert Sinclair, sneered as Musk took his seat at the defense table. "So, Mr. Musk," Sinclair said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "what brings the king of tech to a simple corporate lawsuit? I thought you'd be off building rockets or creating your next empire." Musk didn't flinch. "I'm here because I believe in the principle of fairness, Mr. Sinclair," he said, his tone calm but firm. "If you're suggesting that a person's worth or success should dictate their right to seek justice, then we're no longer dealing with a legal system. We're dealing with a popularity contest." The words hung in the air like a challenge. It was as if Musk was telling everyone in the room, including the judge, that he wasn't afraid of the system. If anything, he might even be able to bend it to his will. But was this arrogance, or was it something deeper? Judge Hall couldn't tell yet. She had seen powerful people try to manipulate the system before, executives, politicians, celebrities. But Musk was different. His reputation for bending the rules, pushing boundaries, and taking risks had made him a household name. And now, he was sitting in her courtroom. For better or for worse, the world was watching. Judge Hall cleared her throat and looked down at her papers, trying to regain control of the situation. "Let's proceed," she said firmly, motioning for the attorneys to begin their opening statements. But her mind was elsewhere, already processing the unusual turn of events. As the trial unfolded, Musk's demeanor continued to surprise her. He wasn't like the usual corporate defendants she'd seen. His answers were direct, but layered with subtlety, as if he was playing a different game altogether. While the other attorneys danced around legal jargon, Musk seemed to speak in terms of grand ideas and future possibilities. For a moment, Judge Hall forgot she was in a courtroom and imagined she was attending one of Musk's TED Talks instead. Every time Musk spoke, there was something magnetic about it. The way he framed his arguments wasn't just about facts or figures, it was about vision. About shaping the future. She couldn't help but be captivated. It wasn't about winning this case for him, it was about something bigger. Something much more profound. During a short break, Judge Hall walked to the back of the courtroom, her mind racing. She couldn't remember the last time a defendant had had such an impact on her. It was as if Musk wasn't merely participating in this trial, he was rewriting the rules of engagement. Her curiosity had been piqued. She had heard about Musk's unconventional approaches in business, how he seemed to have an uncanny ability to see the future and make it happen. But could those same traits work in a courtroom? And if so, what did that mean for her and the justice system she had sworn to uphold? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. The thought popped into her mind, a stray memory of the digital age Musk had come to represent. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For now, Judge Hall had only one question in her mind: was Elon Musk just playing the game, or was he truly a legal genius? And if so, what would that mean for the trial, and for her? As the break ended and the proceedings resumed, she prepared herself for the answer. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Judge Rebecca Hall had always prided herself on keeping a level head. She was a professional, someone who had learned to separate personal feelings from the law, to focus on facts, and to make decisions based on the evidence at hand. Yet, as she sat in her chambers that evening, reviewing the case file for the 100th time, her mind kept returning to one thing: Elon Musk. Who was this man, really? Sure, the media had painted a picture of him, an eccentric billionaire, a genius inventor, a visionary, but how much of that was true? And how much of it was just a carefully crafted narrative? She sat back in her chair, closed her eyes, and let the thoughts wander. Elon Musk was born in Pretoria, South Africa, in 1971, the son of a model and an electromechanical engineer. From a young age, he had exhibited the type of intelligence that could make anyone's head spin. At the age of 12, he taught himself computer programming and created a video game called Blaster, which he sold to a computer magazine for $500. Even then, Musk was on the path to something far greater than most people could ever imagine. He had always been a bit of an outsider, someone who didn't fit into the mold of traditional schooling. Musk was different, and it was evident from the beginning. He had a hunger for knowledge, a desire to understand how things worked, on a molecular level, on a cosmic scale. That desire to question everything, to break apart conventional thinking and rebuild it in a way that made sense to him, was the thread that ran through his entire life. It wasn't just about being the smartest in the room, it was about revolutionizing the way the world worked. In his early 20s, Musk moved to Canada to attend Queen's University, before transferring to the University of Pennsylvania in the United States. It was there that he earned degrees in both economics and physics. But it wasn't long before he decided to strike out on his own, leaving behind the academic world in favor of Silicon Valley. He founded Zip2, a company that provided online city guides to newspapers, and quickly sold it for nearly $300 million. But it wasn't the financial success that mattered to Musk, it was the bigger vision. He took that money and invested it into ventures that would later change the world: PayPal, which revolutionized online payments; SpaceX, which sought to make space travel more affordable, and Tesla, which aimed to shift the world away from fossil fuels. He wasn't just building companies, he was building the future. By 2008, Musk had become one of the most recognized and controversial figures in tech. SpaceX had faced several failed rocket launches and was on the verge of bankruptcy. Tesla was struggling to deliver a viable electric vehicle. Yet, Musk never gave up. He poured his personal fortune into both companies, convinced that he could make them work. And work they did. SpaceX became the first private company to send a spacecraft to the International Space Station, and Tesla's electric cars became a symbol of the future of transportation. Musk was no longer just a businessman, he was a disruptor, a visionary, a figure whose ideas had the power to reshape the entire world. But it wasn't just his business acumen that made him famous. Musk was also known for his bold and, at times, controversial statements. He was active on Twitter, frequently sharing his thoughts on everything from artificial intelligence to politics to the future of humanity. His tweets often sparked heated debates, and his opinions were rarely neutral. He had a tendency to make headlines, whether for good or ill. It was this public persona that had made him both beloved and despised in equal measure. Some saw him as a genius, a man who was changing the world for the better, who was working tirelessly to solve the most pressing issues of our time. Others saw him as arrogant, unpredictable, and prone to making reckless decisions. His reputation had grown as a person who didn't play by the rules. In business, in technology, and, now, in the courtroom. As Judge Hall looked at the case file again, she realized just how much of this story had played a role in bringing Musk into her courtroom. This wasn't just a corporate lawsuit. This was a battle for control of one of Musk's companies, a company that had been caught up in a tangled web of allegations involving mismanagement and misconduct. But beyond the business disputes, there was something deeper at stake. This case wasn't just about legalities. It was about power. Musk was no stranger to conflict, whether with competitors, regulators, or the media. He had faced lawsuits before, and had always come out victorious, often by using his charisma and, it seemed, his genius for the law. His legal team was one of the best in the country, but Musk himself was the one who led the charge, analyzing every angle and every detail with the precision of a man who had built his empire by bending the rules. His reputation for getting things done, no matter the cost, was legendary. But why was he here, in her courtroom, at this particular moment in time? The judge flipped through the file again, skimming the legal documents. The charges were serious, involving everything from financial mismanagement to allegations of ethical violations. If the case went in the wrong direction, Musk could lose more than just a company. He could lose his reputation, his legacy, and perhaps even his influence over the future of the industries he had helped shape. But Judge Hall couldn't shake the feeling that this case was about something more than just money. It was about a battle between old systems of power and new, disruptive forces. And Elon Musk, whether he liked it or not, was at the center of it. As the trial resumed the next day, Judge Hall watched as Musk entered the courtroom again, his calm demeanor betraying nothing. He wasn't just a tech mogul, he was something else entirely, a man who seemed to move through the world with a sense of inevitability. Judge Hall couldn't help but wonder, was Elon Musk simply a product of his times, a man who saw the future before anyone else? Or was he something more, a legal genius in disguise, capable of navigating the law in ways she had yet to fully understand? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. The thought popped into her mind again, this time more serious. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For now, she had to stay focused. The case was only just beginning, but she already had the sense that nothing about it would be ordinary. And somewhere deep down, she knew this was going to be one of the most important trials of her career. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension. The trial had entered its third day, and Judge Rebecca Hall could feel the weight of the case bearing down on her. Elon Musk sat in his seat, his hands clasped in front of him, his face betraying little emotion. He had already demonstrated his ability to sway the room with his charisma and confidence, but now the true challenge had begun. On the opposing side, Robert Sinclair, the lead attorney for the plaintiffs, was sharpening his arguments, relentlessly attacking Musk's credibility and the management of his company. Sinclair was an experienced lawyer, with a reputation for winning high-profile cases, but even he seemed to be struggling with the force that Musk had become. Still, he was relentless. "Mr. Musk," Sinclair said, his voice cutting through the room. "You claim that your companies are models of innovation and efficiency. Yet, the evidence clearly shows that your financial practices are anything but transparent. And you," he paused, his gaze landing on Musk. "You repeatedly ignored warnings from your own team, as if the rules didn't apply to you. Does that sound like the behavior of a responsible CEO?" Musk's eyes flicked to Sinclair, and for a moment, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The tension was palpable. Musk's reputation had preceded him, but here, in the courtroom, it wasn't just about tech innovations or Twitter spats. It was about accountability, about proving that he had played by the rules, or if, perhaps, he had bent them in ways that no one else could. "Mr. Sinclair," Musk said, his voice calm, almost unnervingly so. "You're right about one thing. I don't play by the same rules. But that's because I don't believe the old rules serve us anymore. Innovation requires breaking free from outdated paradigms. If I listened to the status quo, we'd still be stuck in the past." Sinclair's expression darkened. He had expected Musk to respond this way. No one had ever been able to pin him down with conventional tactics. Musk wasn't just a defendant, he was a force, a whirlwind of ideas and energy that didn't fit neatly into any box. Judge Hall shifted in her seat, observing closely. She wasn't just listening to Musk's words, she was watching the way he carried himself, the way he responded to every challenge with the calm certainty of a man who believed he was always right. And yet, she couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in her gut. Musk's confidence, while admirable, seemed dangerously close to arrogance. The very thing that might get him in trouble in the long run. "Your Honor," Sinclair continued, turning to her, "we have shown evidence that Musk's companies regularly disregarded industry standards. From manipulating financial reports to failing to disclose critical information to shareholders, his actions have cost investors millions. This is not a case of disrupting industries, this is a case of negligence and deceit." The room seemed to freeze. Judge Hall's gaze flicked to Musk, then back to Sinclair. She had been a judge long enough to know when a case was about to explode, and she could feel the tension in the room building, a slow burn that threatened to ignite at any moment. Musk's lawyers, a team of slick, well-dressed attorneys, immediately shot to their feet in defense. They were quick to point out that the evidence Sinclair had presented was circumstantial and taken out of context. They argued that Musk's actions, however unconventional, were always in the best interest of his companies and, more importantly, in the best interest of the future of technology itself. Judge Hall, one of Musk's attorneys, a sharp-looking man named Leonard Hayes, said smoothly. "The plaintiff's entire case is built on a misunderstanding of how innovation works. Yes, there were risks. Yes, there were mistakes. But without those risks, without those mistakes, we wouldn't have the world-changing companies that Mr. Musk has built. It's easy to attack him from the outside, but none of these people have the vision to understand what he's trying to accomplish. He is not the villain here." The defense's argument was met with a ripple of murmurs throughout the courtroom. Musk had always portrayed himself as the hero of his own narrative, a man who saw beyond the horizon and worked tirelessly to make his dreams a reality. To his supporters, he was a savior, an innovator who pushed boundaries and fought against the system. To his critics, he was a reckless billionaire, playing with the future of the world like a child with a new toy. Judge Hall took a deep breath. She had been following the case with intense focus, and while she understood the arguments on both sides, she was beginning to see something more insidious brewing beneath the surface. Musk's defense team was brilliant, but it was becoming clear that they were using his public persona, his genius, his passion, his drive, as armor. And Sinclair? He wasn't just trying to win a legal battle. He was trying to dismantle that persona, brick by brick. As the trial dragged on, the courtroom became a battleground. Musk's supporters in the audience grew louder with each passing day, some even wearing Tesla t-shirts and holding up signs. His detractors were just as vocal, accusing him of manipulating the system for personal gain. It seemed that every move Musk made only fueled the conflict, and the more it escalated, the more the public began to scrutinize every detail. One afternoon, as the trial broke for a short recess, Musk found himself alone for a moment, his lawyers discussing strategy at the far end of the courtroom. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the air conditioning. For the first time in days, Musk seemed to allow himself a moment of reflection. His fingers tapped idly on the table in front of him, and his mind wandered. Judge Hall, who had stepped into the hallway to clear her thoughts, noticed him. She had seen him in the courtroom, of course, but there was something about this moment, something raw, that made her pause. She couldn't help herself. "Mr. Musk," she called out, walking toward him. Musk turned, his face softening just a fraction, as if startled by the interruption. "Judge Hall," he said with a nod, as though they were old acquaintances. "I've been watching you," she said simply. "And I must say, you've managed to make this trial interesting." Musk's lips quirked into a half-smile. "I suppose that's one way to look at it. People don't tend to pay attention unless you shake things up." There was an edge to his voice, but it wasn't arrogance, more like something else. A resignation, perhaps, or a recognition that the rules of the game were changing. "Are you worried?" Judge Hall asked before she could stop herself. He met her gaze for a moment, his eyes unreadable. "Worried? About the trial? About losing?" "No. The stakes are high, but I've been in higher stakes situations before." Judge Hall studied him, the weight of the trial pressing in on her shoulders. The world was watching, and she had the feeling it wasn't just the outcome of this case that mattered. It was everything that came after. The trial had entered its fourth week, and the courtroom had become a stage for an ongoing drama, with each side pushing harder, each move calculated with the precision of a chess game. The stakes had grown even higher, as the case had captured the attention of not just the legal community, but the entire world. The tension was palpable. Elon Musk sat at the defendant's table, his expression unreadable. He had faced adversity before, rocky launches, financial struggles, the constant barrage of media scrutiny, but this was different. The courtroom felt more like a battlefield than a place of justice. Every word, every glance, every gesture was being analyzed, dissected, and broadcasted to millions of people watching from the comfort of their homes. For the first time in his career, Musk felt the weight of something much bigger than himself. It wasn't just about the companies he had built, or the public persona he had crafted. It was about his legacy, the future he had worked so hard to create, now hanging in the balance. Judge Hall had noticed the shift in him. She had seen him respond with characteristic confidence during the first few days of the trial. But now, there was something else. Something almost vulnerable in the way he carried himself. It wasn't the typical arrogance she had expected, the bravado of a billionaire who was used to bending the world to his will. There was a quiet determination in his eyes, and the weight of the situation had clearly started to sink in. As the trial broke for a lunch recess, Musk's legal team gathered around him, discussing their strategy in hushed tones. Outside the courtroom, reporters buzzed with speculation, eager for any new developments. But Musk remained in the courtroom, his gaze fixed on the documents in front of him. He wasn't looking at the case file anymore, he was looking at something deeper, something that none of his lawyers could help him with. The future. Judge Hall, too, had felt the mounting pressure. The media circus surrounding the case had been overwhelming, and she was well aware of how much her ruling would affect not only Musk but the very fabric of the industries he had revolutionized. She had dealt with high-profile cases before, but this one was different. It was personal in a way she couldn't quite explain. Musk's story, his rise from an outsider to a titan of industry, struck a chord with her. She had built her own career through hard work and determination, just as Musk had. But there was something else, something that was tugging at her sense of justice. She had always prided herself on impartiality, on making decisions based purely on the law. But this case was forcing her to confront a moral dilemma she had never faced before. Was it possible to separate Musk's business genius from his alleged wrongdoing? Could she judge the man for his actions, or was she being asked to judge the world he had created? As Judge Hall sat in her chambers, reviewing her notes, she was interrupted by a knock on the door. "Your Honor," her clerk said, stepping inside. "The jury has returned. They've made a request to speak with you privately before we reconvene." This wasn't a usual request, and it piqued Judge Hall's curiosity. She had been aware of the murmurs of unease among the jury members. Some had been clearly swayed by Musk's charm and his eloquent defense, while others had been troubled by the evidence presented by Sinclair's team. This case had divided opinions, and it was clear that the jury was grappling with a conflict of their own. "Very well," Judge Hall said, standing. "Let's see what they have to say." The jury filed into her chambers, their expressions serious. There were no smiles, no signs of camaraderie. They were, as expected, a divided group. Some were nodding in agreement with one another, others stood with their arms crossed, clearly hesitant. "We've been talking," the foreperson began, a middle-aged woman named Angela, "and we need to understand how we should approach this. This is more than just a business case. This feels like a referendum on Musk himself. And we're struggling to separate the man from his actions." Judge Hall nodded. She had expected this. "You are right. This case is more than just about finances, more than just the corporate dynamics. It's about the way Musk's actions have impacted not just his companies, but the world." Another juror, a younger man in his 30s, spoke up. "But isn't that the point? He's revolutionized multiple industries. He's taken risks that no one else would have dared. Can we hold him accountable for the things that went wrong, when so much of what he's done has been, well, extraordinary?" Angela, the foreperson, shook her head. "But that's the problem, isn't it? We're being asked to look at a man who has changed the world, and then determine whether or not he crossed a line. And we can't ignore the fact that people lost a lot of money. People's lives were affected by his decisions. If we just forgive everything because of his success, aren't we setting a dangerous precedent?" Judge Hall felt the weight of their words. This wasn't just a legal question, it was a philosophical one. What made someone a genius? And could they be a genius and a criminal at the same time? It was a line she had never had to draw before, and now, she had to find a way to help the jury navigate it. "You must focus on the facts," Judge Hall said, her voice firm. "Your duty is to evaluate whether or not the law was broken, not whether or not you admire the person standing before you. This trial is about accountability. Can you separate your admiration for Musk's achievements from your obligation to hold him accountable for his actions?" There was silence in the room. The jury members exchanged uncertain glances. They had their work cut out for them, and now they had to decide not just the fate of Elon Musk, but whether they would allow their personal feelings to cloud their judgment. The jury exited the room after a long discussion, and the court reconvened. Musk's legal team had been working overtime, trying to shift the public narrative in their favor, but the tension was mounting. In the courtroom, it was clear that everyone was waiting for the inevitable confrontation. The next phase of the trial was about to begin, and things were only going to get more complicated. Elon Musk sat back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the front of the courtroom. Despite the mounting pressure, he wasn't showing signs of giving up. The calmness in his demeanor suggested that, for all the chaos around him, he was still in control. But deep down, he knew the hardest part of the journey was yet to come. The courtroom was silent, the air crackling with anticipation as the proceedings resumed. The tension had reached a boiling point, and it felt as though the entire world was watching. This wasn't just a trial about corporate negligence anymore, it had transformed into something much larger. For weeks, Elon Musk had been sitting at the center of a whirlwind of accusations, debates, and media scrutiny, but today felt different. Today, everything was about to come to a head. Judge Hall took her seat, her stern gaze sweeping over the room. She knew the weight of the decision that loomed over her. She had been a judge for many years, but this case, this trial, had tested her in ways she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just the legal arguments or the drama that captivated the public, it was the very essence of what Musk represented. The world was divided. On one hand, he was seen as a visionary, a genius who had reshaped industries and inspired millions. On the other, he was painted as a reckless billionaire, willing to put profit above people, bending the rules at will. The jury had deliberated for days. There had been heated discussions behind closed doors. Some jurors felt a deep admiration for Musk's accomplishments, the way he had turned Tesla into a powerhouse, how SpaceX had revolutionized space travel. Others felt that his reckless disregard for laws, his penchant for disregarding corporate governance, could not be ignored, no matter how much he had contributed to society. But in the end, it wasn't just about admiration or disdain. It was about accountability. And as the defense had predicted, Elon Musk's own words had become both his greatest asset and his most damning evidence. His confidence, his belief that the rules didn't apply to him, had made an impact on the jury, and it wasn't entirely the one he had hoped for. As the trial entered its final phase, Elon Musk sat in the courtroom, his face stoic as ever. But inside, a storm was brewing. Despite his outward calm, his mind raced through everything that had happened in the past few weeks. This wasn't just about proving he was innocent. It was about protecting his vision, the very essence of what he believed the future could be. For all his fame and fortune, Musk was deeply aware of the potential consequences of losing this case. If he lost, it wouldn't just be a financial setback, it would be a crushing blow to his reputation, his companies, and, perhaps most importantly, to the very future he had worked so tirelessly to shape. He had always known that risk was part of the game, but now, the stakes were personal. And yet, as the days wore on, Musk found himself confronting a reality he had long avoided. It was no longer about winning or losing in the traditional sense. It was about the people whose lives had been affected by his actions, people whose trust had been broken. He had spent years pursuing greatness, but now, in this courtroom, he was being forced to face the emotional toll of his ambition. Judge Hall had noticed the shift in him. She had seen the carefully constructed walls he had built around himself begin to crack. It wasn't just the defense's arguments or the plaintiff's accusations that had affected him. It was the realization that his dream, his relentless pursuit of progress, had come at a cost. "Mr. Musk," Judge Hall called, her voice cutting through the silence in the room. "It is your turn to speak. Do you wish to address the court?" Musk stood slowly, his eyes fixed on the judge. The moment he had been dreading had arrived. He knew that his closing statement would be the culmination of everything, the arguments, the evidence, the testimonies. But more than that, it was his chance to speak from the heart. He cleared his throat, his voice steady, but with a tinge of emotion. "Your Honor," he began, "I stand here today not just as a CEO or a businessman. I stand here as a man who has tried to do something different, something bigger than myself. I've built companies that I believe can change the world. But I've made mistakes. I'm not perfect. No one is. I can admit that." There was a pause, and Musk looked out across the courtroom, as if searching for the right words. The jury sat in rapt attention, and even Sinclair, his main adversary, watched intently. "I've always believed in the power of innovation. I've always believed in doing the impossible. But I've also learned that with great power comes great responsibility. The decisions I've made, the risks I've taken, they've had real consequences. And for those who have been hurt, for those who've lost because of my actions, I am deeply sorry. It was a rare moment of vulnerability from Musk, and it didn't go unnoticed. For the first time, the courtroom felt like it was witnessing the man behind the mask of genius and eccentricity. It wasn't the defiant billionaire now, but a man who was reckoning with the reality of his actions. I know this trial is about accountability. And I am willing to accept responsibility for my mistakes. But I also ask you to look at what we've built, the progress we've made. Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, they are all part of a vision that can push humanity forward. I made mistakes, yes, but I have always tried to build something that matters. And I hope that, in the end, you'll see that the future is worth fighting for, even if we stumble along the way. Musk's voice wavered, and for a moment, Judge Hall saw something she hadn't expected, a man who, despite his arrogance and flaws, was deeply committed to his ideals. His passion was undeniable, but so were the cracks in his armor. The room was silent for several moments as Musk finished speaking. Judge Hall couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a trial, it was a moral reckoning. It was a moment when the line between right and wrong wasn't as clear-cut as it had seemed. She glanced at the jury, their faces reflecting the same internal struggle. Musk's words had resonated with them, just as they had with her. Could they separate his vision from his flaws? Could they reconcile the genius of his work with the damage his actions had caused? The emotional climax of the trial had arrived, and the decision they would have to make would change everything. As the jury began their final deliberations, Musk sat in his chair, the full weight of the trial pressing down on him. He had done everything he could. The fate of his companies, his career, and his future now rested in the hands of the 12 people who sat in that jury room. For the first time in a long while, Elon Musk felt a sense of fear, not about the trial itself, but about what might come next. The emotional climax had come, and now, the real journey was about to begin. The courtroom was eerily quiet as the jury filed back in, their expressions unreadable. The weight of the moment hung thick in the air, as the crowd waited, breath held, for the verdict that would either exonerate or condemn Elon Musk. It felt as though time had slowed, the tension so thick it was almost tangible. Outside, cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and the world seemed to hold its collective breath. The story of Elon Musk, a man who had redefined the possibilities of technology, was now at the precipice of its most crucial chapter. Judge Hall's gavel came down with a sharp, deliberate sound that broke the silence in the courtroom. The moment had arrived. "Will the jury foreperson please rise?" she asked, her voice measured and stern. The foreperson stood, her hands slightly trembling, though her face remained composed. She held a piece of paper in her hand, the result of days of deliberation, hours of reflection, and countless internal battles. Musk's fate now rested in her hands, and the decision was one that would reverberate far beyond this courtroom. The foreperson cleared her throat. "Your Honor, we, the jury, have reached a verdict." Elon Musk sat forward in his chair, his gaze fixed on the foreperson. His usual cool demeanor was gone, replaced by an intensity, a vulnerability that only those closest to him had ever seen. His future, the future of his companies, and even the future of technological innovation itself seemed to hinge on these few moments. Judge Hall nodded solemnly, her eyes focused on the foreperson. "Please read the verdict." The foreperson unfolded the paper in her hands and took a deep breath before speaking. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Elon Musk, guilty of corporate negligence. However, we find him not guilty of intentional fraud and not guilty of violating federal regulations." A collective gasp rippled through the room. There was no immediate celebration from either side, no cheering or groaning. The jury had reached a compromise, one that was as unexpected as it was complex. Musk's heart pounded in his chest, but he remained silent, taking in the words. The courtroom was a cacophony of whispers, but Musk didn't hear any of it. All he could hear was the sound of his own breath, steady and deep, trying to calm the storm inside. Guilty of negligence. It wasn't a complete defeat, but it was far from a victory. Judge Hall addressed the jury. Thank you for your service. Your decision is noted, and I will now move forward with the sentencing phase. Mr. Musk, do you wish to address the court before I proceed with the next steps? Elon Musk stood, his knees slightly shaking but his posture as firm as ever. This wasn't the moment for pleading or anger. It was a moment of acceptance. He had been found guilty of negligence, a failure, perhaps, but not an intentional crime. He had been guilty of overestimating the boundaries of his ambition, of believing his vision could justify every risk he took. But now, the consequences were clear. And it was time to face them. He took a breath before speaking. Your Honor, I accept the jury's verdict. I recognize that my actions have consequences, and I will take responsibility for those consequences. He paused, looking directly at Judge Hall. But I also want to make one thing clear, my work, my companies, and my vision have always been about creating a better future. I never intended to harm anyone. I've made mistakes, and I will work to ensure that they never happen again. I can't change the past, but I will do everything in my power to make things right. His words were simple, but there was an authenticity to them that resonated with the people in the room. It wasn't the brash billionaire speaking. It was a man who had been knocked down, but had refused to stay down. He wasn't asking for forgiveness, but he was showing remorse, and that was something Judge Hall couldn't ignore. Judge Hall nodded thoughtfully, and there was a moment of quiet before she spoke again. Mr. Musk, your acknowledgement of the jury's decision is noted. As for sentencing, I will consider the mitigating factors. However, I am inclined to impose a fine, as well as a mandate for you to establish a formal system for corporate oversight within your companies. You will also be required to participate in a series of workshops designed to ensure that future actions taken by your companies adhere to the highest ethical standards. Musk nodded slowly, acknowledging the sentence without protest. It wasn't what he had hoped for, but it was a price he was willing to pay for the future he believed in. He had long known that no one was above the consequences of their actions, not even him. But he also knew that this wasn't the end. It was just another beginning. As the court proceedings drew to a close, Elon Musk left the courtroom, his legal team by his side. The media descended on him in a frenzy of questions and flashing cameras, but Musk remained silent, his face impassive. He had faced his trial, and while the outcome wasn't ideal, he had come out the other side intact. Outside the courthouse, a massive crowd had gathered. People who had followed Musk's story from the very beginning, those who had admired his ingenuity and his audacity, were waiting for him. They weren't cheering or jeering, they were waiting for a sign of what this verdict meant for them, for their future. Elon Musk stepped outside into the bright sunlight, his eyes scanning the crowd. For a moment, he felt as though he was at the center of a storm. The world was watching, and this was his chance to show them who he truly was. He took a deep breath and raised his hand, not in victory, but in acknowledgement. This is just the beginning, he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. There's still much work to be done. But we will keep moving forward. Because the future doesn't wait. As Musk walked away from the courthouse, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had led him here. The mistakes, the triumphs, the battles, everything had brought him to this moment. The trial had been a test, not just of his legal innocence, but of his ability to face the consequences of his actions and continue to move forward. In the end, the verdict was a complicated one. It wasn't a clean slate, but it was a chance to rebuild, to learn, and to continue pursuing the vision he had always believed in. There would be no turning back now. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, Elon Musk felt something close to peace. The battle had been hard fought, but he had emerged stronger for it. The world had tested him, and he had answered. Now, he could finally focus on what really mattered, the future. The days following the verdict were some of the most uncertain in Elon Musk's life. While the trial had ended, it felt as though the battle was far from over. The world had watched as his companies and personal life were placed under the microscope, and now, despite the resolution, there were still lingering questions. Would this change the trajectory of his career? Would he be able to reclaim the trust he had lost? Or would this verdict, despite its complexity, be the turning point that shattered everything he had worked for? As he stood in front of his desk at Tesla's headquarters, Elon gazed out the window at the bustling city below. His thoughts were heavy, the weight of the future pressing down on him more than ever. The world was always watching, he had known this from the beginning. But now, it felt like everything he did, every decision, every misstep, would be scrutinized like never before. It had been a week since the trial had concluded. The media frenzy had died down slightly, but the narrative still lingered. Headlines still screamed about the trial's outcome, and his social media feeds were filled with a mixture of support, criticism, and fervent debate. His followers, those who had believed in him and his vision, were still there, rooting for him to continue his journey. But then there were others, those who saw his trial as a sign that he was nothing more than a reckless billionaire who had gotten away with too much. The voices on both sides were loud, and they seemed to drown out everything in between. He had always prided himself on his ability to push past the noise. But today, it felt different. The verdict had been a wake-up call, one that forced him to confront his own weaknesses, his impulsiveness, his disregard for certain rules, his tendency to go headfirst into challenges without always thinking of the consequences. As he sat down at his desk, a message from his legal team appeared on his screen. It was a brief update on the ongoing efforts to put the oversight measures in place that the court had mandated. He couldn't deny the irony, he had built companies that redefined industries, but now he was being forced to reshape how they were managed, how they were governed. The very thing he had always rebelled against, the constraints of conventional corporate practices, was now the key to his future. It was a humbling thought. The phone on his desk buzzed, breaking his reverie. It was a call from his top executive, Sam Walker, Tesla's chief financial officer. "Hey, Elon. Got a minute?" Sam's voice was calm, but there was an undertone of concern that Elon didn't miss. "Yeah, what's up?" Elon replied, sitting back in his chair. He knew that Sam wouldn't be calling unless it was important. "Just wanted to check in after the trial," Sam began. "There's some unrest among the board members. They're concerned about the direction things are headed, especially with the oversight mandate. They're asking for more concrete plans for how we'll comply and how this impacts Tesla's autonomy." Elon ran a hand through his hair, his mind whirring. He had anticipated this. Of course, the board would be nervous. The uncertainty that hung over Tesla in the wake of the trial was palpable. But what was even more frustrating was that he knew the board was right to be worried. Their concern wasn't about innovation, about revolutionizing industries. It was about profit, stability, and avoiding risk. And risk, for Musk, was the entire point. "I'll meet with them next week," Elon said finally, his voice steady despite the frustration brewing inside him. "We'll lay out the path forward. But make it clear, Tesla will not be bound by traditional corporate red tape. We'll integrate the changes, but we're not going to let this verdict define us. The world needs Tesla more than ever, and we won't stop because of a few bumps in the road." Sam paused for a moment before responding. "Understood. Just wanted to make sure you were aware. We'll make it work, but the board's asking for assurances. They want a clear roadmap for the future." Elon let out a slow breath. He didn't need more assurances. What he needed was the freedom to build, to innovate. But he also knew that in order to keep moving forward, he would have to make some compromises. As much as it pained him, he understood that the future of Tesla, and of his other ventures, depended on his ability to adapt, to find a balance between his boldness and the responsibility that came with it. Later that day, as he was leaving the office, Elon found himself reflecting on something Judge Hall had said during the trial. "With great power comes great responsibility." It had sounded like a cliché at the time, but now, in the aftermath of everything, it rang true. He had always understood the power of his ideas, the magnitude of what his companies could achieve. But now, he was forced to face the consequences of that power. People looked up to him, people who believed in the future he was shaping. And with that trust came a weight he hadn't fully understood until now. He stepped into his car, the familiar hum of the Tesla Model S surrounding him, but it felt like a different experience today. Everything had changed. Not just the legal landscape, but the emotional and personal one as well. Elon had always been driven by an unshakable belief in his mission. But now, he had to ask himself, was it enough to believe in the future if the present was constantly in question? His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from his brother, Elon Musk. I know things are tough right now, but remember, this is just one chapter in a long book. Keep your head up. The world is still waiting for what you can do next. Elon smiled briefly. Kimball had always been the steady voice in his life, the one who reminded him of the bigger picture when he was caught up in the chaos of the present. And in that moment, Elon realized something important. No matter how hard the road ahead was, he couldn't afford to lose sight of why he started this journey in the first place. He hadn't gotten this far by second-guessing himself. And he wouldn't start now. As the car drove through the city streets, the towering skyline of downtown Los Angeles casting long shadows across the road, Elon made a quiet vow to himself: he would not let this trial be the end. It would be the beginning of something new, a chance to rebuild, to learn, and to continue pursuing the future he believed in, no matter the cost. Because for all the pain, the setbacks, and the doubts, one thing remained clear: the future was still waiting. Elon Musk sat at his desk the following morning, the sun streaming through the large windows of his office. The day had started like any other, yet there was a distinct difference in the air. It wasn't just the aftermath of the trial hanging over him, nor was it the uncertainty that had plagued him in the past week. No, this felt different. Today felt like the first true day of the rest of his career. Elon had spent hours in his private conference room the previous night, going over plans, preparing presentations, and even sketching out ideas on the whiteboard. For the first time in a while, he wasn't just focused on the next big breakthrough or invention, he was focused on rebuilding trust. He had always known that leadership wasn't just about making bold decisions or pushing boundaries, it was about earning and maintaining the trust of those who followed you. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. He knew there were going to be more hurdles, more scrutiny, and more judgment. But the future had always been uncertain for Elon Musk, whether it was the skeptics who doubted Tesla's ability to revolutionize the automobile industry, or the critics who called SpaceX's plans to colonize Mars impossible. But it wasn't the naysayers who drove him, it was the belief that failure was only a stepping stone to something greater. That same drive was what had brought him here, to this pivotal moment, standing in the ruins of a past mistake, but also in the beginning of a new era. A road to redemption wasn't about avoiding the mistakes, it was about acknowledging them and moving forward with a renewed commitment to the work that mattered most. He opened his laptop, checking the emails that had come in overnight. There was one from his legal team with a subject line, "Oversight Plan Update." He clicked on it. The email detailed the new frameworks they were putting in place for Tesla's governance structure. There was a proposal for regular third-party audits, a new position for an independent board member who would focus on ethical oversight, and guidelines for transparency in decision-making processes. While the plan seemed sensible, it also felt like a burden, something that restricted the very flexibility and speed that had made Tesla and SpaceX what they were. Elon sighed and typed out a quick response to his legal team. "We'll integrate these measures, but we need to make sure they don't slow us down. I want constant progress, not just compliance." He hit send, then leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He didn't want to lose the speed that had been his greatest asset in building these companies. He had always prided himself on being an innovator, someone who could think years ahead of his competition. But now, with oversight and governance structures being put into place, he feared that the very systems that had helped him thrive might become shackles. But that was part of the process, wasn't it? Learning to balance the ambition with the responsibility. The door to his office opened, and Sam Walker, Tesla's CFO, stepped inside, holding a file in his hands. "Morning, Elon," Sam greeted him, his tone professional but with an underlying sense of empathy. Sam knew how hard the last few weeks had been for Elon. "Morning," Elon replied, gesturing for Sam to take a seat. "What's the update?" Sam handed over the file. "I've gone over the revised oversight proposals, and I think there are some adjustments we can make that will both meet the court's demands and allow us to keep moving fast. For example, I've spoken to a few people at the board who are worried about the constant audits. They don't understand how these reviews can be anything but a roadblock." Elon skimmed through the document, nodding as he read. "I understand their concern, but we need to find a balance. We can't have things grinding to a halt, but we also can't afford to ignore the lessons learned from this trial. The point is to make sure that this doesn't happen again." He paused and then added, almost as an afterthought, "I'll have a meeting with the board later this week to lay it all out. Make it clear that we'll keep innovating, we'll just be more transparent in how we do it." Sam nodded. "Sounds good. There's also the matter of public perception. Some of our investors are spooked. They're not sure how this verdict affects Tesla's reputation in the long run. I think it might be time for a public address." Elon frowned. He hadn't given much thought to public speeches recently. For years, he had let his companies do the talking. But now, the world was waiting for him to respond, not just through actions, but with words. It wasn't just about the technology anymore. It was about leadership. "I'll handle it," he said finally, tapping a finger on the desk. "We'll do it at the upcoming Tesla annual meeting. I'll address the public directly. They need to hear from me, not from the press or the analysts." Later that afternoon, Elon sat down to compose his speech for the Tesla meeting. The weight of his words wasn't lost on him. This was more than just an address to shareholders. It was his chance to reassure his team, his investors, and his customers that the company was on the right track. He had made mistakes, but that didn't define him. His future wasn't dictated by his past failures, it was shaped by his commitment to pushing the boundaries of what was possible. He started typing. "Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you today not just as the CEO of Tesla, but as someone who is committed to the future. It's been a challenging few weeks, to say the least. I've faced scrutiny, judgment, and consequences for my actions. And I take full responsibility for the mistakes that were made. But I will not allow these mistakes to define us. We are not just a company, we are a movement. And as with any movement, there will be setbacks, there will be obstacles. But we will not stop. We will learn from our past and push forward with more determination than ever before." He paused, reading the words he had written. It wasn't just about apologizing or explaining himself. It was about reigniting the passion that had first led people to believe in his vision. He continued. "The road ahead may be more difficult, but it will also be more transparent. We are introducing measures to ensure that we remain accountable, not just to our shareholders, but to the world. We will rebuild the trust that has been shaken. And together, we will change the world once again." Elon leaned back in his chair and stared at the screen. It wasn't a perfect speech, but it felt real. It felt like it came from him, someone who had made mistakes, learned from them, and was ready to move forward. As the evening fell, Elon felt a sense of resolve settle over him. The world would be watching his every move, but he had to be okay with that. He had always been a public figure, but now, more than ever, his words and actions would have lasting consequences. The next chapter wasn't just about innovation, it was about redemption. And he was ready to take that step. Tomorrow would be another day of meetings, another day of pushing forward. But tonight, he allowed himself a brief moment of peace. The future was still out there, waiting for him. And he was more than ready to meet it. The Tesla annual meeting loomed large, and Elon Musk was already feeling the weight of it before he even stepped foot on the stage. His team had prepped him on every possible angle, every question, and every potential criticism. The media would be watching. Investors, shareholders, customers, everyone was waiting for him to speak. The question was no longer whether he would address the trial, that was inevitable. The real question was, how would he rebuild trust? The media storm surrounding him hadn't died down since the trial. In fact, it had intensified. Headlines screamed about the legal consequences, questioned his leadership, and speculated on the future of Tesla. The debate wasn't just about his vision for the future, it was about his character, his integrity. Elon stepped out of his car as it pulled into the parking lot of the Tesla headquarters. The reporters were already there, cameras trained on him, their questions shouted from every angle. He ignored them, his eyes fixed ahead, his mind focused on the task at hand. It wasn't the first time he had been the center of a media storm, but this time, it felt different. He wasn't just facing the usual controversies about Tesla or SpaceX. This time, the storm was personal. The trial, the accusations, the media frenzy, it had all magnified the scrutiny on him in ways he hadn't expected. Yet, he knew he couldn't avoid it any longer. He had to address it head-on. He walked into the building with a purposeful stride. Inside, the Tesla team was already preparing for the meeting. Sam Walker and other senior executives were gathered around a conference table, reviewing the final details of the presentation. "Hey, Elon," Sam greeted him, offering a reassuring smile. "You ready for this?" Elon nodded, though he felt the familiar knot of tension in his stomach. "As ready as I'll ever be." Sam handed him a tablet. "Here's the final draft of your speech. We've gone over it with the communications team. Everyone agrees this is the right tone." Elon glanced at the screen. The speech was solid, clear, concise, and firm. But there was something about it that felt distant. It was the kind of speech a politician would give, a polished, safe address designed to calm the crowd. But that wasn't Elon. Not really. "I'll make a few changes," Elon said, his voice steady but determined. "We need to speak from the heart, not just the script. Let's make this real." Sam nodded, understanding the importance of Elon's personal touch. "Got it." The meeting room was buzzing with energy as the Tesla board members and key investors filed in. Elon took his seat at the head of the table, his mind running through the points he wanted to make. The room was filled with eager faces, but he could see the undercurrent of anxiety. Everyone was on edge. They had questions, and they needed answers. As the presentation began, the room grew quiet. Sam kicked things off, outlining the progress Tesla had made since the trial and the new governance measures they had put in place. The mood was calm, professional. But Elon knew the real conversation wouldn't begin until he spoke. Finally, it was his turn. He stood up slowly, adjusting the microphone, and took a deep breath. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for being here today," Elon began, his voice steady. "I know many of you have been worried. There's been a lot of talk, some of it true, some of it false. But there's one thing I want to make clear: Tesla is not defined by the mistakes I've made. We are defined by our vision, our mission, and the future we are building." He paused, making eye contact with the room, feeling the weight of their gaze on him. This wasn't just a corporate meeting. This was a moment that could shape the future of Tesla, and possibly his entire legacy. "The trial was a wake-up call," he continued, his voice slightly softer. "It showed me where I went wrong, where I let my ambition get ahead of my responsibility. I've learned a lot from it. But the most important lesson I've learned is that we can't afford to let these setbacks define us. We have to move forward. And we have to move forward together." Elon's eyes scanned the room. He could see the skepticism in some faces, but there was also something else, a flicker of hope. They wanted to believe in him. They needed to. "I know some of you are concerned about the future of this company," he said, his tone firm. About the oversight, the audits, the changes we're making. I understand that. But let me be clear, these measures are not meant to stifle us. They are meant to strengthen us. We can be bold, we can be visionary, but we can also be responsible. And that's the path we're taking. The room was still, the tension thick in the air. But as Elon spoke, he felt a sense of clarity wash over him. This wasn't just about fixing the company. It was about fixing himself. He had let his impulsiveness, his drive, and his arrogance get the best of him. But now, he was ready to lead in a new way, one that balanced his ambitious goals with the responsibility of leadership. After the meeting, as the room began to empty out, Elon found himself alone with Sam. "Do you think they bought it?" Sam asked, his tone a mix of hope and concern. Elon shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I think they wanted to. It's not about convincing them, though. It's about showing them that we're still the same Tesla. We're still the company that will change the world. We're just doing it smarter now." Sam nodded, his face thoughtful. "You did good, Elon. But now, it's up to you to follow through." Elon stood in silence for a moment, watching the last of the board members leave. His heart was still racing, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace. The media would still hound him, the critics would still criticize, but the future was his to shape. And he was ready to face it. Later that evening, Elon sat in his office, reflecting on the day. The media would be out in full force, covering the speech, analyzing his every word. But it no longer mattered to him. What mattered was what came next. The media storm would eventually fade, and the work would remain. It was time to prove that his actions could speak louder than any headline. The day after the Tesla annual meeting, the media was in full swing. News outlets, social media platforms, and even late-night talk shows buzzed with coverage of Elon Musk's speech. Opinions were divided. Some praised him for acknowledging his mistakes and laying out a path forward, while others remained skeptical, questioning whether his words were just another attempt to dodge accountability. Elon sat in his office, scrolling through the articles on his tablet, feeling the familiar mixture of pride and discomfort. He had done what he needed to do, he had faced the storm head-on. But now, as the dust settled, he realized that the work had only just begun. He needed to prove that his commitment to change wasn't just lip service. The public, his investors, and even his own team needed to see that he could back up his words with concrete action. The speech was just the first step. The next step was proving that he could be the leader they all believed he could be. The next few weeks were a blur. Tesla's leadership team worked tirelessly to implement the new oversight and governance measures that Elon had promised. Independent audits were scheduled, board members who had the authority to challenge Elon's decisions were brought in, and transparency initiatives were launched. Elon was involved in every decision, his hand in each step of the process, but now there was a difference. He wasn't just making decisions for the sake of progress, he was making decisions with the understanding that his legacy, his company's future, and his own personal redemption depended on every move. Through it all, Elon kept his focus on the big picture. He didn't let the constant media attention distract him. He didn't let the critical voices get under his skin. Instead, he threw himself into Tesla's projects, working alongside engineers, designers, and developers to push forward on the company's latest innovations. His attention was on the future, not the past. Still, there was one area that Elon couldn't ignore: SpaceX. While Tesla was his most high-profile company, SpaceX had always been the driving force behind his larger-than-life dreams. But lately, the challenges with Tesla had taken up most of his time, and SpaceX had faced its own set of problems. Some of their ambitious projects were behind schedule, and Elon knew that the company's public perception could also be at risk. He scheduled a meeting with Gwynne Shotwell, the president and COO of SpaceX, to discuss the company's next steps. Gwynne was one of the few people Elon truly trusted to tell him the hard truth, and he needed that now more than ever. Gwen's office at SpaceX was sleek, with large windows offering a panoramic view of the rocket development facilities in the distance. Elon sat across from her, a coffee cup in hand. She didn't waste any time on pleasantries. "Elon," she began, her voice steady and professional, "we need to address the delays. I know Tesla's been your primary focus, but we're falling behind on the Mars mission timeline. Our investors are getting nervous, and so are the engineers." Elon nodded. "I know. I've been caught up in Tesla, but SpaceX is the heart of my vision. I can't let it fall behind." "I get that," Gwen said. "But we need more than just your commitment. We need you back in the driver's seat. You need to make decisions, keep the teams on track. Right now, it's not just about pushing forward, it's about pushing forward smartly. And we need your guidance more than ever." Elon felt a weight settle on his shoulders. It was true. SpaceX had always been his grandest dream, and now it was in jeopardy. But the truth was, he didn't know how to divide his attention between Tesla, SpaceX, and everything else. The demands were overwhelming. And yet, there was no escaping the fact that his success in one area relied heavily on his success in the other. "I'll get on it," Elon said, determination in his voice. "Let's get a team together. I'll visit the facility next week and meet with the engineers. We'll reevaluate the timeline and see where we need to make adjustments." Gwen gave a small nod. "Good. And we'll need to work on rebuilding public trust. SpaceX can't afford to be in the shadows while Tesla takes the spotlight. We need to make sure people know that we're still the same company that revolutionized space travel." Elon leaned forward, his eyes locking with Gwen's. "I'll handle it. We'll turn things around. This isn't just about making a rocket. This is about changing the future. And we'll do it, no matter the setbacks." Later that day, Elon stood in the middle of Tesla's Gigafactory, surrounded by engineers working on the next generation of electric vehicles. The factory floor was alive with activity, the hum of machines, the chatter of workers, and the relentless pace that had become the hallmark of Tesla's culture. Elon watched them with a sense of pride. This was what he had built, this was the future he had always envisioned. But even as he marveled at the progress Tesla had made, his mind kept drifting back to SpaceX. There was no avoiding the reality that both companies needed his attention. Both were integral parts of his vision. Both needed to succeed. He spent the rest of the day in meetings, making decisions, and overseeing new initiatives. But in the back of his mind, the thoughts about SpaceX kept nagging at him. How could he give both companies the attention they needed? How could he balance his legacy and future in both industries? That night, as Elon walked out of the Gigafactory and into the cool evening air, he realized something important: he couldn't do it all alone. He needed his team, his leadership teams at both Tesla and SpaceX. He had built these companies by trusting people who shared his vision, and now, he needed to trust them to help him steer both ships. The weight of the future was heavy on his shoulders, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of clarity. He didn't have to bear the burden alone. He just needed to be the leader they needed him to be, not a lone visionary, but a collaborator, a coach, someone who could inspire and empower the brilliant minds around him. The ripple effect of his decisions was just beginning. As he drove home that night, Elon knew the road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like he was on the right path. He wasn't just focused on redemption anymore. He was focused on transformation, both for his companies and for himself. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The following week, Elon Musk found himself once again standing in the heart of SpaceX's headquarters in Hawthorne, California. The familiar hum of machines, the clang of metal, and the quiet chatter of engineers were the sounds of his dreams in motion. Yet, as he gazed at the vast rockets lined up in the assembly area, he felt a profound sense of urgency. This time, the pressure wasn't just external, it was internal. The weight of both Tesla and SpaceX on his shoulders was immense, and he had no more time for second-guessing. Gwynne Shotwell was waiting for him, as always, prepared and direct. As Elon entered her office, she barely looked up from the detailed spreadsheets laid across her desk. "Elon, I've been working with the engineering teams on streamlining the Mars mission timeline," Gwynne said. "We've narrowed it down to a few key bottlenecks. But there's still a gap between our vision and reality. We need to address this if we're going to make any headway in the next year." Elon nodded, his mind already churning with ideas. "Let's fix the bottlenecks, but more importantly, we need to get ahead of the game. We can't afford to wait on traditional timelines anymore. We need breakthroughs, fast. Innovation is what got us this far, and innovation is going to get us to Mars." Gwynne met his gaze with a thoughtful expression. "I agree. But pushing the envelope too fast can lead to mistakes. We're already facing challenges in reusability with the rockets, and I think we need a strategic rethink, not just a fast-track solution." Elon sat back, considering her words. "You're right. We've been so focused on scaling that we haven't truly pushed the envelope on new technology. Let's go back to the drawing board. Let's think bigger. We've always been about going to the next level, let's not just tweak what we've got, let's make it something revolutionary." The conversation shifted, and before long, Elon and Gwynne were deep into brainstorming ideas. The idea of developing a new form of propulsion system had been on Elon's mind for a while, but it was risky, perhaps more than he'd like to admit. But, in a way, that was precisely the point. "We need something that will disrupt the entire industry," Elon said, his voice filled with intensity. "Something that will not only get us to Mars but that will change how space travel works for everyone." Gwynne raised an eyebrow. "Are you talking about a brand new form of propulsion? Something entirely outside the current understanding?" Elon leaned forward, the spark of innovation igniting in his mind. "Exactly. Let's push the limits of what we can do with ion propulsion, nuclear energy, whatever it takes. We're SpaceX, we're not in the business of just meeting expectations. We're in the business of defining the future. We can't just be part of the space race, we need to lead it." As the days passed, Elon's thoughts were consumed with the possibilities for SpaceX. He called in his most trusted engineers, tasked them with brainstorming radical new propulsion technologies, and began assembling a think tank of visionary minds to completely overhaul the company's approach to space travel. It was an intense period of sleepless nights and endless debates, but Elon thrived in this atmosphere of relentless innovation. Meanwhile, at Tesla, things were progressing as planned. The new governance structures were taking root, and the company's commitment to sustainability and cutting-edge electric vehicles remained on track. However, Elon found himself feeling pulled in two directions. He couldn't stop thinking about Mars, about the stars, about what SpaceX could achieve. Tesla was his vehicle for change on Earth, but SpaceX was his vehicle for the future of humanity. His thoughts were interrupted one afternoon when he received an unexpected call from his legal team. The ongoing legal case was far from over. As much as Elon had hoped that the worst was behind him, the fallout from the trial still loomed. The opposing side had filed for an appeal, and this meant that the media circus would once again rear its ugly head. The last thing Elon wanted was more public scrutiny, but he had no choice but to face it. Later that day, Elon stood on the rooftop of the SpaceX building, looking out over the skyline of Los Angeles. His thoughts were racing, not just about the legal battles, but about the future. He knew he couldn't afford to lose focus on what really mattered. He had started these companies to revolutionize the world and to leave a mark on history, but now, he needed to make sure he was doing it for the right reasons. No more distractions, no more egos. The call from Gwynne broke his moment of reflection. "Elon, I've got an update," she said. "We've made a breakthrough with the propulsion system. It's not a full solution, but we've got a working prototype. It's untested, but the initial results look promising. Elon's heart skipped a beat. What kind of breakthrough are we talking about? Gwyn's voice was full of excitement. It's a hybrid ion engine, using a combination of plasma and an advanced energy cell we've been experimenting with. We're not quite there, but the preliminary tests are showing that we can achieve the energy efficiency we need. It could change everything. Elon grinned, feeling the excitement surge through him. That's incredible, Gwyn. This could be the game changer we need. Let's take this to the next level. Full speed ahead. Test it, push it, do whatever it takes to make it work. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. At SpaceX, the new propulsion system was being tested in secret, with Elon visiting the facility every few days to track progress. The engineers were working overtime, and the atmosphere was one of controlled chaos. But Elon felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was the kind of innovation that Tesla had been built on, and it was exactly what SpaceX needed to carry it into the future. At Tesla, the company continued its upward trajectory, maintaining a steady flow of innovative vehicles and products. Yet, Elon knew that he had to maintain the delicate balance between both companies. Every step he took, every decision he made, would reverberate across both Tesla and SpaceX. But for the first time in months, he felt confident that he could do it. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore, he was fighting for a new kind of future. One evening, after a long day of meetings and calls, Elon returned to his apartment in Los Angeles. He sat down at his desk, staring out at the city lights. His thoughts were a blur, but one thing stood clear: he was on the verge of something monumental. Whether it was Tesla's next-generation electric car or SpaceX's revolutionary propulsion system, he was at the center of it all. And as he looked out at the skyline, the stars above seemed a little closer tonight. Elon Musk's mind was always in motion. Even when he wasn't actively working, his thoughts would churn relentlessly, focused on his companies, the future, and the challenges that lay ahead. But even he knew that there were moments when the pressure became almost unbearable. His legal battles with the SEC, the constant scrutiny from the media, and the ever-increasing expectations from investors weighed heavily on his shoulders. It was early morning, and the sky outside his office in Palo Alto was just beginning to light up with the soft colors of dawn. Elon was already sitting at his desk, scanning over the latest reports from Tesla and SpaceX, the weight of both companies pressing down on him. He hadn't slept well the night before, his mind racing with questions about where things were headed. His phone buzzed on the desk, breaking his thoughts. It was an alert about the legal case. The SEC had filed another round of charges, and this time, the stakes were even higher. Elon knew that the pressure was about to mount again. His team had been working tirelessly to ensure that the case wouldn't spiral out of control, but there were moments when the legal process seemed entirely out of his hands. Elon took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. He couldn't let this take him off course. His focus had to remain on the bigger picture. Tesla needed to keep moving forward, and SpaceX's ambitions could not be delayed. His mind was set, and he knew that the only way to move forward was to keep pushing. The next day, Elon met with his top legal advisors to discuss the situation. His lead attorney, Rachel, sat across from him in the boardroom, along with the rest of the legal team. The tension in the room was palpable. "Elon, the SEC is doubling down on their accusations," Rachel began. "They're claiming that you misled investors once again, and this time, they're seeking more severe penalties. If we don't win this, it could have serious repercussions for both Tesla and SpaceX. Not just in terms of fines, but in terms of public trust." Elon nodded. "What's our plan?" "We're preparing a defense, of course. We're arguing that your statements were in line with the company's forward-looking goals and were not intended to mislead anyone. But we also need to consider the possibility of a settlement." "A settlement?" Elon felt a surge of frustration. "I don't settle. If I did, it would show the world that they can bully me into submission. We're not backing down." Rachel hesitated before responding. I know, Elon. But we have to be realistic here. A prolonged legal battle could drag on for months, maybe even years, and it's going to distract us from everything else. We need to decide whether we're going to fight this out in court, or take the pragmatic route. Elon stared at the table, his thoughts a whirlwind. He hated the idea of surrendering, of giving in. But he also knew that he couldn't afford to lose focus on the companies that depended on him. This wasn't just about winning in court, it was about winning in the long run. I'll handle it, he said after a moment of silence. I'll make sure we stay the course, no matter what. But we're not going to let this stop us. As the days passed, the pressure only seemed to grow. Elon immersed himself in his work, throwing himself into both Tesla and SpaceX. But it wasn't just the legal battles that loomed large. His ambitions for SpaceX's Mars mission, the propulsion system breakthrough that had shown so much promise, and the new innovations Tesla was pursuing, all of it felt more critical than ever. Gwynn had made significant progress with the new propulsion system, and the team was ready for the first round of tests. Elon was excited, this was the kind of breakthrough he'd been waiting for. The potential for a fully reusable spacecraft capable of going to Mars and beyond was within reach, but it also meant they had to push harder than ever before. There were no guarantees in space travel, and failure was always a possibility. But if anyone could make it work, it was SpaceX. In parallel, Tesla was continuing its push to be the leader in the electric vehicle market. The production of the new Model Y was ramping up, and the gigafactories were expanding. The demand for electric vehicles was increasing, and Elon was determined that Tesla would be the company leading the charge. But there were obstacles on the horizon, too: supply chain issues, rising costs of raw materials, and increased competition from other automakers all threatened to derail progress. One evening, Elon found himself sitting in a darkened conference room at Tesla, staring at the giant screens in front of him. The room was empty except for him and a few senior engineers. The project for the new solar roof was falling behind schedule, and the production numbers were lower than expected. His mind was spinning with possibilities, but one thing was clear: he couldn't afford another setback. "All right, let's talk through the numbers," Elon said, his voice calm but intense. "What's going wrong with production?" One of the engineers, a soft-spoken man named Sam, stepped forward. "The issue is in the manufacturing process, Elon. We're using a new type of material, and it's not performing as expected. We're still tweaking the equipment to get it just right, but the process is slow." Elon leaned forward, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. "We don't have time for slow. We need to figure out how to scale this quickly. Our vision for the future depends on this." Sam nodded, understanding the urgency. "We've got the best engineers on it. But it's going to take time to perfect." "Time isn't something we have," Elon replied. "We need to accelerate this process. I don't care if we have to work 24/7 to make it happen. We're going to get this right." As the days turned into weeks, Elon found himself juggling an increasing number of crises: legal, technical, and logistical. But through it all, he never lost sight of the bigger goal: to transform both Tesla and SpaceX into companies that would change the world. Even as the storm raged around him, he remained laser-focused on the future. The legal battles continued to drag on, but Elon knew that they were just one part of the equation. The real challenge was keeping the momentum going, making sure that both companies didn't lose their edge. Tesla's future was in the hands of its leadership team, but SpaceX was still his true passion. The dream of sending humanity to Mars was closer than ever, but it was also precariously perched on the edge of uncertainty. As Elon sat alone in his office late one night, looking over a new design for a Mars-bound spacecraft, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Whether for better or worse, the next chapter of his life was waiting. And he was ready to face it, no matter the cost. The next few months were a whirlwind of challenges and triumphs. Elon Musk had grown accustomed to the pressure that came with being at the helm of two of the world's most innovative companies, but this time, the stakes were higher than ever. Tesla's reputation and SpaceX's future were on the line. The legal battle with the SEC was ongoing, and Elon felt the weight of every court appearance and every new media headline. But despite the mounting pressure, he remained resolute in his belief that both companies could thrive. The internal workings of his companies were stable for now, and both SpaceX and Tesla were pushing boundaries at a pace few had ever imagined. Still, in the quiet moments, when the world wasn't watching, doubts crept in. Was he spreading himself too thin? Was his focus being divided too much between two revolutionary enterprises? One morning, as Elon sipped his coffee in his Tesla office, the phone rang. It was Gwynne Shotwell, the president of SpaceX, calling with an update on their Mars mission propulsion breakthrough. "Elon, we've done it," Gwynne said, her voice brimming with excitement. "The hybrid propulsion system is operational. The tests are proving the efficiency we need to make long-term space travel possible. We're on the verge of something monumental." Elon sat up straight, a smile tugging at his lips. "That's incredible, Gwynne. What's the next step?" "We're preparing for a full-scale test flight," she replied. "The team's confident, but as you know, this kind of thing doesn't come without risks. We need your final approval to proceed." "Approve it," Elon said without hesitation. "Let's push this forward. We can't afford to wait any longer. This is the key to getting us to Mars." The sound of her voice was one of unadulterated determination. "I'll get the teams ready. We're moving forward." Elon hung up the phone, his pulse quickening. The propulsion breakthrough was a huge step forward, and SpaceX was closer to its goal of revolutionizing space travel than ever before. But the risks were real. Every failure, every setback, could mean millions of dollars in losses and months of delay. And yet, Elon's philosophy had always been the same: no progress without risk. In the weeks that followed, SpaceX's testing continued. Every day, Elon would receive updates on the propulsion system's performance. The news was mostly good, but there were a few issues, nothing catastrophic, but small tweaks needed here and there. Each time the test flight was delayed, Elon felt the pressure of the clock ticking down. The Mars mission couldn't afford more delays. Meanwhile, at Tesla, progress was also being made, albeit with its own set of hurdles. The Model Y was nearing its official release, and Tesla's gigafactories were ramping up production. But the challenges within the company were ever present. Supply chain disruptions, the rising costs of lithium and other raw materials, and fierce competition from new entrants into the electric vehicle market meant that Tesla couldn't afford to slow down. Elon found himself in constant communication with his team, ensuring every decision was made swiftly and efficiently. Despite the success of Tesla and the progress at SpaceX, there were moments when Elon felt the weight of it all: the crushing responsibilities, the looming legal battles, the doubts about whether he could truly manage it all. But it was in these moments that his resolve strengthened. He had built these companies from the ground up, and he wouldn't let anything tear them down. One afternoon, as he walked through the Tesla production floor, Elon was approached by Linda, the head of supply chain operations. "Elon, we've run into another issue with the battery cell supply chain," Linda said, her voice tinged with concern. "The supplier we've been relying on for the past few months is facing their own issues. It's threatening our production schedules. We might have to find an alternative." Elon stopped in his tracks, turning to face her. "How long do we have?" "About 2 weeks, at most, before it starts affecting our production targets for the Model Y and the Cybertruck," Linda replied. Elon's mind raced as he tried to process the news. Another disruption, another challenge. But he was used to finding solutions. "I want you to get our best engineers on this," he said. "Let's see if we can't solve this ourselves. We don't have time to wait on others." Linda nodded. "I'll make sure the team gets on it right away." As she walked away, Elon stood there for a moment, his mind working through the potential solutions. Tesla had come this far by overcoming obstacles, and this was just another hurdle in the long road to success. They would find a way through it. They had to. The full-scale test flight of SpaceX's new propulsion system was scheduled for the following week. Elon, still anxious about the progress of both companies, found himself torn between his responsibilities at SpaceX and the crises at Tesla. The night before the test flight, he sat alone in his office at SpaceX, staring at the blueprint of the propulsion system on his screen. He had seen the simulations, heard the engineers' assessments, but it was only after the test flight that they would know for sure if the system could perform as expected. He picked up the phone and called Gwyn. "We're ready," Gwyn said. "The rocket is fueled, the crew is on standby. All systems are go." Elon took a deep breath, feeling the tension in his chest. "Make it happen, Gwyn. This is everything." The line went silent for a moment, and then Gwyn's voice returned, calm and reassuring. "We're all in this together, Elon. You've built this team, and we're going to make history." The test flight was scheduled for the following morning, and as Elon lay down for a few hours of sleep, his mind refused to rest. The weight of the moment loomed large, the culmination of years of work, sleepless nights, and untold sacrifices. If this test flight succeeded, it would propel SpaceX one giant leap closer to sending humans to Mars. But if it failed, the repercussions would be felt across the industry. The next morning, Elon stood in the SpaceX control room, his eyes fixed on the live feed of the rocket as it stood on the launch pad. The countdown had begun. The engineers and technicians around him were focused, their eyes glued to their monitors, but Elon could sense the collective tension in the room. As the rocket soared into the sky, it was like watching a dream take flight. The propulsion system hummed with unprecedented efficiency, and the telemetry data was off the charts. For the first time in months, Elon felt the weight on his shoulders lighten. The test was a success. Elon's eyes glistened with a mixture of relief and triumph. "We did it," he whispered. In the days that followed, the entire SpaceX team celebrated the success. The propulsion breakthrough was a game-changer, and Elon was already thinking about the next steps. But there were still many more obstacles ahead. Legal challenges, supply chain issues at Tesla, and the ever-present need to innovate in an industry that was evolving by the minute. But Elon Musk, with his unrelenting drive and vision for the future, knew that this was only the beginning. The world was watching, and he was ready to lead it into a new era. The dust had barely settled from the success of the propulsion test, and yet the whirlwind continued. Elon Musk couldn't afford to pause for long, not when both Tesla and SpaceX were racing toward the future. His teams at SpaceX were still reveling in the successful test, but they knew the next phase, implementing the propulsion system into the Mars-bound missions, was going to be even more difficult. And then there was Tesla. Despite the recent strides in vehicle production, supply chain crises, and growing competition, the pressure continued to mount. The world was waiting to see if Tesla could live up to the promise of sustainable electric vehicles, and the competition was no longer only from traditional automakers. Rivals were emerging in every corner, and Elon couldn't let his focus waver for even a moment. He was, as always, navigating a delicate balance between the immediate problems at hand and the monumental, world-changing vision he had for both companies. And that balance was becoming harder to maintain. A week after the successful propulsion test, Elon found himself back in a boardroom at Tesla. The atmosphere in the room was tense. Linda, the head of supply chain operations, had called for an emergency meeting. "Elon, I wish I had better news," Linda began, her voice heavy. "We've received notice that our primary lithium supplier is facing major production delays. Without the supply of lithium, our battery production is going to be significantly impacted. We're looking at a shortfall that could affect production for several of our upcoming models." Elon rubbed his temples, feeling the strain. "How severe is this? How long can we stretch the current supply?" "We've managed to stretch it for the next few weeks, but after that, we're at risk of falling behind schedule for the Model Y ramp-up and the Cybertruck release, Linda replied. We've contacted several other suppliers, but we're looking at delays of anywhere from 3 to 6 months before we can source alternative lithium supplies at scale. Elon stood up, walking to the window of the boardroom and staring out at the factory floor below. He wasn't known for showing his frustration, but this was a new kind of challenge, a challenge that threatened to slow down the entire industry. This can't happen, he said, his voice steady but firm. We're not going to let this delay the future of electric vehicles. I want all hands on deck. Start contacting every possible alternative supplier we can find. If we can't get the materials, then we need to look at how we can innovate our battery technology to be less reliant on lithium. Time is not on our side here. Linda nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. Understood. I'll get our teams on it right away. Elon turned back to face the team. We've been through worse before. We'll find a way to make this work. Tesla's mission is too important to be delayed. The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and strategy sessions. Elon split his time between Tesla's headquarters and SpaceX's launch sites, trying to ensure that both companies remained on track. The stress was undeniable, but it was the price he was willing to pay for the dream he had built. As SpaceX prepared for the next step in the Mars mission, Elon found himself more involved than ever. There were no more minor issues to resolve. This was a full-scale operation, and every detail mattered. Elon had never been one to shy away from a challenge, but as the pressure mounted, he started to notice the toll it was taking on him. The long hours, the sleepless nights, and the constant juggling between his companies were beginning to catch up with him. But he couldn't afford to stop. Not now. One evening, as he was reviewing final designs for the Mars-bound spacecraft, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was from Rachel, his lead attorney. Elon, we've hit a snag in the legal case with the SEC, Rachel said, her tone serious. They're asking for more documents, more testimony, and they're looking to expand the scope of the investigation. They're pressuring us to settle. Elon closed his eyes, taking a moment to process the news. The SEC had been relentless, and every time he thought the case was nearing a resolution, another complication arose. We're not settling, he replied, his voice sharp. Not now. They're just trying to bully me into backing down. I won't let them win. Rachel was quiet for a moment, her voice calm but measured. I know you feel strongly about this, Elon. But we need to weigh the long-term consequences. If we keep pushing, this could drag on for years, and it will take time and focus away from everything else. Tesla and SpaceX need you. I'm not backing down, Elon insisted. We'll fight this through. This isn't just about me, it's about the principles we stand for. We're not going to be intimidated by the SEC. They can't slow us down. The following weeks passed in a blur of high-stakes decisions and breakthroughs, both in the courtroom and in the engineering labs. While the legal case with the SEC continued to drag on, the momentum at Tesla and SpaceX was undeniable. At SpaceX, Gwynne and the engineering team were finalizing the preparations for the next mission. This time, it was a full-scale mission with an unmanned flight to test the hybrid propulsion system at a greater distance. The goal was to prove not just the viability of the technology but also its reliability on long-duration flights. This was the kind of mission that would demonstrate to the world that SpaceX wasn't just a company that sent people to low Earth orbit, it was a company that could make interplanetary travel a reality. Elon had always seen this moment coming, but now that it was upon him, the enormity of the task seemed more daunting than ever. If the propulsion system failed at this stage, it would set the Mars mission back by years. He couldn't afford to fail. Back at Tesla, the supply chain issues persisted. The lithium shortage wasn't the only problem. Production delays had caused a domino effect, and the Model Y's production numbers were slipping behind schedule. Elon knew that if Tesla didn't manage to hit its targets for the next quarter, it could affect stock prices and investor confidence. But he refused to panic. If there was one thing he had learned over the years, it was that innovation always triumphed over adversity. As the deadline for the Model Y release approached, Elon found himself working late into the nights. His team was tired but focused, and they were pushing hard to make up for lost time. Elon had always believed that when the going got tough, that's when the true breakthroughs came. The late-night sessions, the moments of uncertainty, those were the moments that separated the companies that would survive from the ones that would collapse. One evening, as Elon was sitting in his office overlooking the Tesla factory floor, he felt a quiet moment of reflection. The world had changed so much since he first started Tesla, and SpaceX was pushing the boundaries of what was possible. But he knew the fight wasn't over. The legal battles, the supply chain struggles, and the pressure to succeed, it was all a constant reminder that innovation came at a price. But for Elon Musk, there was no other choice. The mission was clear, to change the world. And no matter how difficult the journey, he would keep pushing forward. Elon Musk's life had always been a relentless pursuit of the next big breakthrough. Every moment, every decision, was driven by an intense vision to change the world, whether through electric cars or space exploration. Yet, as he stood on the precipice of yet another critical moment in both Tesla and SpaceX's history, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was nearing a tipping point. The legal case with the SEC continued to stretch on, drawing more and more of his attention and energy. But that was just one part of the equation. Tesla was on the verge of its next major milestone, the full-scale release of the Model Y. The countdown clock for the Cybertruck's mass production was ticking. And then there was SpaceX. SpaceX was about to embark on one of its most ambitious missions to date, the full-scale interplanetary test flight, where they would test the hybrid propulsion system over longer distances. If that flight failed, it wouldn't just set back the Mars mission, it could severely damage the company's credibility. The stakes were high, but Elon knew that high stakes had always been part of his journey. Every major achievement had come with risk and sacrifice. This time, however, the weight of everything seemed to press down on him harder than ever. It was late one night when Elon found himself walking through the quiet halls of Tesla's Gigafactory. The production lines were empty, save for a few engineers working late into the night to troubleshoot a few minor setbacks. Elon could feel the tension in the air, the anticipation was building. The world was watching. The electric vehicle revolution that he had started was about to reach a crucial turning point. Linda, the head of supply chain, had just left him with some unsettling news. Despite their best efforts, Tesla was still facing major setbacks in sourcing critical materials, and the delay in production could have a ripple effect on their projected delivery timelines. Elon, Linda had said earlier that day, we might have to consider scaling back the release of the Model Y or even pushing back the Cybertruck's launch. It's not ideal, but the supply chain issues are reaching a critical point. We can't afford to miss these deadlines, but we also don't want to sacrifice quality. Standing there in the vast empty space of the factory floor, Elon let the weight of those words sink in. The thought of pushing back the timelines was a bitter pill to swallow. Tesla had been on a trajectory to change the world, and every delay felt like a step backward. He couldn't afford to lose momentum now. As the next few days passed, Elon worked tirelessly to solve the supply chain crisis. His team was scrambling to find new suppliers, new materials, and new ways to innovate within the constraints they were working with. And even though he was confident in his team's abilities, it was the legal battle with the SEC that hung over him like a dark cloud. Every day brought new developments in the case, and Elon could sense that the government's case against him was growing stronger. The public pressure was mounting, and he could feel the weight of it, even as he tried to focus on his companies. But then, amidst the chaos, a breakthrough came. SpaceX was ready for its next big mission. Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president, called Elon to deliver the news. Elon, the hybrid propulsion system is ready for its first long-duration test flight. The teams have been working day and night, and we're confident this will be a game-changer for interplanetary travel. Elon's heart raced as he listened to Gwyn's voice crackling over the phone. He knew this test flight could be a defining moment, but the pressure weighed heavily on him. One failure could be catastrophic, and while he trusted Gwyn and the SpaceX team, there was always that lingering fear of the unknown. "When is the test?" Elon asked, his voice steady despite the thoughts racing in his mind. "It's scheduled for next week," Gwyn replied. "We're pushing the boundaries here. If we get this right, it could change everything for SpaceX, and for the future of space exploration." "Make it happen," Elon said, his voice firm. "No matter what, we're not backing down." The conversation ended, and Elon sat there in his office, staring out at the night sky. For the first time in a while, a sense of resolve filled him. The upcoming test flight wasn't just another milestone for SpaceX, it was a moment that could make or break his vision of a sustainable, multiplanetary future. It was time to take the leap. There was no turning back. The next week arrived, and the world watched as SpaceX prepared for the crucial test flight. Elon flew out to the launch site, where the hybrid propulsion system was undergoing final checks. The excitement and tension in the air were palpable. This was one of those moments where success would propel humanity into a new era of space exploration, while failure could send shockwaves through the industry. As Elon arrived at the launch site, the massive spacecraft stood on the pad, ready for takeoff. Engineers and technicians moved quickly around the vehicle, double-checking systems and preparing for the final countdown. Elon stood with Gwyn and the rest of the leadership team, his gaze fixed on the towering rocket. There was no room for error. "Is everything ready?" Elon asked Gwyn, his voice tight with anticipation. "We're good to go, Elon," Gwyn replied, her face calm, but there was an unmistakable intensity in her eyes. "The team has been working around the clock, and all systems are green. We're ready for launch." Elon nodded, feeling the weight of everything on his shoulders. He had built SpaceX from the ground up, and if this mission succeeded, it would not only validate the company's technology but also make interplanetary travel a reality. If it failed, the entire industry would doubt their ability to innovate on such a scale. The countdown began. 3, 2, 1. The rocket lifted off the pad, its engines roaring with the power of a new age of space travel. Elon watched the ascent on the live feed, his heart pounding in his chest. The propulsion system was performing flawlessly, and the rocket accelerated into the sky, its trajectory on course for the test parameters. For what seemed like an eternity, Elon and the rest of the team stood in silence, waiting for the system to complete its full cycle. And then, after what felt like an eternity, the confirmation came. "Mission success," Gwyn said, her voice breaking the silence. "The hybrid propulsion system has performed beyond our expectations. The test flight was a success." A wave of relief washed over Elon, but it was tempered with the reality that the next steps were still far from guaranteed. But this success was monumental. SpaceX had taken a massive leap toward its goal of Mars colonization. As the team celebrated, Elon took a quiet moment to reflect. There would be more challenges ahead. Tesla still had its own obstacles to overcome, and the SEC case was far from over. But in that moment, as he watched the rocket disappear into the stars, he knew that the future was within reach. He had taken the risks, endured the battles, and pushed through the hardships. And for the first time in a long time, Elon Musk allowed himself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, he was on the cusp of changing the world, once and for all. The days following SpaceX's successful propulsion test were a whirlwind. The media coverage was overwhelming, but Elon Musk knew the true battle was just beginning. With the hybrid propulsion system now a proven success, the path forward for SpaceX was clearer than ever. But back at Tesla, the challenges were only escalating. Despite his best efforts to push through the supply chain crisis, Tesla was now facing another issue: production quality. The production of the Model Y, which was supposed to be Tesla's flagship vehicle, had hit some bumps. Quality control reports started coming in showing inconsistencies in parts, and some of the early models had been delivered with issues that ranged from minor defects to serious performance concerns. It wasn't uncommon for Tesla to face quality issues, but these were happening at a critical juncture. If the Model Y failed to meet customer expectations, it could significantly damage Tesla's brand and affect investor confidence. Tesla wasn't just a car company, it was a beacon for the future of clean energy and sustainable transportation. Elon's reputation was tied directly to its success. In a board meeting, Elon confronted his top engineers and executives about the growing concerns. "We can't afford another misstep," Elon began, his voice sharp. "The Model Y is supposed to be our best vehicle yet. These quality issues are unacceptable. I want solutions, not excuses. We need to fix this, and we need to do it fast." His team responded with urgency, but Elon could see the cracks starting to form. The pressure was mounting, and some of the key figures in Tesla were beginning to show signs of fatigue. But Elon wasn't about to slow down. He knew the stakes, and he wasn't about to let anyone stand in the way of his mission. Meanwhile, the SEC case continued to hang over Elon like a cloud, more ominous than ever. Despite his determination to fight back, there was a growing sense that the legal battle could take a more damaging turn. Elon had always been known for his ability to stand firm in the face of adversity, but this case was different. The SEC wasn't just going after his statements or tweets, they were looking to bring him down as a leader and figurehead of Tesla and SpaceX. Rachel, his lead attorney, had been working tirelessly on the case, but the legal landscape was shifting in ways that even she hadn't predicted. One afternoon, as Elon sat in his office reviewing design schematics for the next Mars mission, Rachel called him. "Elon, I need to talk," she said, her voice filled with concern. "The SEC is pushing harder now. They're proposing a settlement, but they're asking for some serious conditions. They want you to step down as CEO of Tesla." Elon froze. The thought of stepping down was not just a blow to his ego, it would be a devastating blow to his life's work. Tesla wasn't just a company to him, it was his legacy. The idea of someone else taking the reins, especially under the scrutiny of the SEC's demands, was unthinkable. "They want me to step down," Elon repeated, his voice low. "Why?" "They're using the recent controversies around your tweets and public statements as leverage," Rachel explained. "It's a way to put this behind us quickly, but it comes at a heavy cost. If you step down, they'll drop the charges. But if you fight it, the case could drag on for years, and there's no telling what kind of damage it could do to the company." Elon stared out the window, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He knew that stepping down would allow Tesla to move on from the legal battle, but it would also mean losing control of the company he had built from the ground up. "I won't step down," Elon said, his voice firm. "Tesla is my life. I'm not going to let anyone take that from me." Rachel hesitated. "I understand, but we need to think about the long-term impact. The SEC won't back down easily, and if we keep fighting, it could hurt everything you've worked for. You have to decide if it's worth the risk." Elon hung up the phone and sat back in his chair. His mind raced, filled with the consequences of every decision. No matter what he chose, there would be no easy path. The fight ahead would be a brutal one. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure continued to mount from every angle. Elon found himself torn between the legal battle with the SEC, the supply chain and production issues at Tesla, and the constant demands of SpaceX. His attention was divided, and though he hated to admit it, there were moments when he questioned whether he could keep up with the relentless pace. It was late one evening when Elon received a call from Gwyn. The situation at SpaceX had just taken a turn for the worse. "Elon, we've hit a snag," Gwyn said, her voice tight with concern. "The next stage of the Mars mission is delayed. The propulsion system we've been testing, it's not quite ready for long-distance travel. We've run into issues with stability at higher velocities, and it's going to take longer than expected to fix." Elon sighed, rubbing his eyes. It felt like the weight of the world was crashing down on him, and every time he thought he'd overcome one obstacle, another one appeared. "How long are we talking about?" he asked. "At least 6 months," Gwyn replied. "We need more time to work out the kinks. This isn't something we can rush." 6 months. SpaceX couldn't afford another delay. The window for launching a Mars mission was closing, and every moment lost meant more time before humanity could finally make its first step toward becoming a multiplanetary species. "Do whatever it takes," Elon said, his voice resolute. "We'll fix this. We're not stopping now." But even as he said the words, a part of him wondered if he was running out of time. The world was changing fast, and every company he built, every dream he had, felt like it was teetering on the edge of collapse. The relentless pressure began to show its effects. Elon's team at Tesla, though dedicated, was starting to experience burnout. He could see it in their eyes. Each meeting, each decision, was weighing on them. And yet, despite the setbacks, Elon refused to back down. This was the moment that would define him, not just as an innovator, but as a leader. But with each challenge, the cracks in his resolve began to show. The weight of it all, the future of electric vehicles, space exploration, and the very companies that had become his identity, was becoming harder to bear. And as the stakes grew higher, so did the risks. Elon Musk was at a crossroads, and the decisions he made in the coming days would shape not only the future of his companies but the future of humanity itself. The next few weeks seemed to stretch into an endless horizon of stress and urgency. Elon Musk's life had always been an intricate balancing act between his companies, his dreams, and his public persona. But now, more than ever, it felt as though every decision could tip the scales. Each challenge, whether with Tesla, SpaceX, or the SEC, was becoming more and more intertwined, each one feeding into the others, threatening to unravel everything he had built. At Tesla, the pressure to meet the promised delivery dates for the Model Y was at an all-time high. The quality control issues had yet to be fully resolved, and with each passing day, it felt as if the window of opportunity was closing. Investors were beginning to question whether Elon could continue to juggle both Tesla's operations and his commitments to SpaceX. Reports were surfacing about internal dissatisfaction among Tesla employees, many of whom were feeling the weight of the delays and the intense public scrutiny. Despite his relentless push for perfection, Elon couldn't help but feel the strain. Tesla was his lifeblood. It was the company he had pushed to the edge of technological revolution, the company that had spearheaded the electric car revolution. The thought of it slipping from his grasp, or worse, failing because of his inability to keep up, gnawed at him. It was late one evening when Elon found himself pacing around his office at the Tesla Gigafactory. The factory floor below was eerily quiet, the hum of machines and workers' voices a distant memory. Most of his team had left for the night, but Elon remained. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The weight of his empire seemed to be pulling him in all directions, and in moments like this, the loneliness of leadership became overwhelming. His thoughts were interrupted when he received a call from Gwyn Shotwell. SpaceX's upcoming mission to test the new hybrid propulsion system was looming, and despite the success of the earlier test flight, there were still lingering doubts about its readiness for longer, deeper space travel. "Elon," Gwyn's voice was steady but edged with concern. "We've hit another snag with the propulsion system. We need to make adjustments to the engine's cooling system before we can proceed with the Mars mission. The team is working around the clock, but we're going to need more time." Elon rubbed his eyes, feeling the exhaustion start to creep in. "How much time?" "At least 3 months," Gwyn replied. "We need to ensure the system is stable for extended travel. The test flight was successful, but the next step is much more complicated." Elon gritted his teeth. SpaceX had always been about pushing the boundaries, but the timeline for the Mars mission was tight. Every delay meant a longer wait for the dream of interplanetary travel. It wasn't just about proving the technology, it was about proving to the world that humanity could leave Earth behind. Make sure it's done right, Elon replied, his voice firm. We can't afford to rush this. If it's a success, it changes everything. Take the time you need, but make it happen. The phone call with Gwyn left him feeling unsettled. It wasn't just the delay with SpaceX, it was the overwhelming feeling that no matter how hard he worked, it never felt like it was enough. There was always another hurdle, another crisis, and always more pressure. The SEC case loomed large in the background, a constant reminder of the consequences of his every move. At that moment, he felt the burden of it all. Could he really do it? Could he keep both Tesla and SpaceX on track? The next day, Elon stood before his Tesla leadership team in a meeting that felt different from all the others. The usual energy was replaced with quiet tension, the air thick with uncertainty. Linda, the head of supply chain, addressed the room first. Elon, we've made progress on the production line, but the issues with the quality of parts are still haunting us. The suppliers we're working with are struggling to meet our standards. If we don't address this soon, we could miss our delivery targets for the Model Y. Elon could feel the heat rise in his chest. They were running out of time. Find new suppliers, he snapped. We can't wait for the old ones to catch up. Do whatever it takes. Get the parts we need, and get them fast. I want the Model Y ready for the launch we promised. The room fell silent for a moment, but Linda nodded. Understood, Elon. Next, the subject turned to employee morale. Tesla's staff had been working tirelessly to meet impossible deadlines, and many were beginning to burn out. A few of the senior engineers had even expressed concerns about their well-being. Elon listened quietly as his team brought up these issues, but in the back of his mind, he knew there was no room for slowing down. The world was watching, and Tesla had to deliver. We can't afford to stop now, Elon said, his voice low but unwavering. This is a critical time for Tesla. We have to push through. Our customers are waiting. And we will deliver for them. After the meeting, Elon retreated to his office, the weight of his responsibilities settling in. As the CEO of both Tesla and SpaceX, he was carrying the hopes and dreams of countless people. Not just investors and employees, but millions of individuals who looked to him as a symbol of innovation and progress. The world saw him as a visionary, but what if he was failing? What if this was too much for one person to handle? Just as he was contemplating these questions, his phone buzzed with a text message from Rachel, his lead attorney. Elon, the SEC is offering a final settlement. If you agree to step down as CEO of Tesla and pay a fine, they'll drop all charges. This could end the case and prevent further damage to Tesla's reputation. But the clock is ticking. Elon's stomach sank. The idea of stepping down was something he had fought against from the beginning, but now the pressure was overwhelming. The legal battle, the intense scrutiny, the public's expectations, it was all converging into a single, impossible decision. Should he compromise for the good of his companies, or continue the fight to preserve his role? He sat there for a long time, staring at the message, contemplating what would be the right choice. But in the end, the decision wasn't easy. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for the future of his companies, his vision, and his legacy. Elon Musk didn't know it yet, but the next 24 hours would change everything. The clock seemed to move faster than ever. Elon Musk sat at his desk, staring at the settlement offer from the SEC that sat in his inbox like a ticking time bomb. It wasn't just the legal ramifications weighing on him, it was the idea of what stepping down as CEO of Tesla would mean. He had been through countless obstacles, from financial struggles to near bankruptcy, but this was different. This felt like an existential threat to everything he had built. The thought of someone else taking the reins at Tesla felt unbearable. This company was his lifeblood, his vision. It wasn't just about electric cars, it was about proving that sustainable energy was the future. He had spent years pushing his team to go beyond the impossible, to innovate at a scale no one had ever imagined. To step away now would mean losing control of that vision, losing his chance to ensure the future he had dreamed of for so long. And yet, the alternative was just as unappealing. The SEC case was far from over, and each day it dragged on, the pressure on Tesla mounted. Investors were getting restless, and there were whispers in the media about Elon's leadership and his future at the company. Would the board even allow him to continue as CEO if the case stretched on for years? It was a decision that no one should have to make. Elon pushed his chair back and stood up, walking over to the large windows of his office. The view of the Gigafactory was mesmerizing. He had always found solace in looking at the factory floor, the place where ideas became reality, where machines worked in perfect harmony to create something that could change the world. But today, it felt different. The hum of progress felt distant, drowned out by the constant noise in his head. He knew the company couldn't keep going like this, and he was beginning to understand that this constant stress was taking its toll on everyone, not just him. His phone buzzed again, breaking his thoughts. It was Gwynne Shotwell, the president and COO of SpaceX. "Elon, we've got a breakthrough," Gwynne's voice came through with urgency. "We found the issue with the propulsion system. It was a small component in the cooling system that was causing instability at higher speeds. The team worked through the night, and we think we've got it fixed. We're on track to launch in the next few weeks." Elon felt a wave of relief. At least there was good news on the SpaceX front. The mission to Mars was still in play. He needed this win. The human race needed this win. The idea that they could launch a successful mission to another planet was something that had kept him going through the darkest times. But the victory felt bittersweet with everything else on his plate. "That's great news, Gwynne," he said, trying to sound confident. "Keep me posted. We're almost there." After the call ended, Elon returned to his desk and stared at the settlement offer again. His mind was racing, and the pressure was mounting from every side. What would it mean for Tesla if he stepped down? Would the company be able to survive without him? Was this the end of his role as the driving force behind his companies? He needed to talk to someone. Someone who understood the stakes but could offer a perspective that wasn't clouded by business interests or legal battles. He dialed the phone number of his close friend and mentor, Larry Page, the co-founder of Google. Larry had always been a sounding board for Elon, someone who had seen the world through the eyes of a tech visionary. "Elon, what's going on?" Larry's voice came through, calm but full of curiosity. "I've got a choice to make," Elon said, exhaling deeply. "The SEC wants me to step down as CEO of Tesla. They say it's the only way to resolve the case and move forward. But if I do that, I lose control of the company. I lose everything I've built. What should I do?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Elon could hear Larry thinking, weighing his words carefully. "You know, sometimes the hardest thing is knowing when to let go," Larry finally said. "You've built something incredible, Elon, and I don't need to tell you how much your vision has changed the world. But there comes a point where holding on too tightly can actually do more harm than good." Elon frowned. "What are you saying? That I should just give up?" "No," Larry replied firmly. "I'm not saying that. But think about this, if you're always fighting to keep control, you might lose sight of the bigger picture. You might be so focused on your role that you forget the purpose of what you're building. Maybe there's a way to step back and let someone else handle the day-to-day stuff while you focus on what really matters. SpaceX, Tesla, they need you, but they also need to move beyond you if they're going to thrive in the long term." Elon stood there, feeling the weight of Larry's words sink in. Was he holding on too tightly? Could he let go of the CEO title and still ensure that his companies thrived? The idea felt strange, foreign. But maybe it was the only way forward. Later that evening, Elon gathered his leadership teams from both Tesla and SpaceX in a virtual meeting. His face was set, and for the first time in a while, there was a sense of clarity in his eyes. "I've been thinking a lot," Elon began, his voice steady. About everything that's happening with the SEC, about the future of Tesla and SpaceX. I've built these companies with my own two hands, and I'll never stop fighting for them. But sometimes, that means stepping aside to let them grow in ways that I can't control. The room went quiet, as his team processed his words. The tension that had been building for weeks was palpable. I'm not giving up, Elon continued, but I think it's time for a change. We need to make sure that Tesla and SpaceX are set up for success, not just with me at the helm but with strong leadership in place. We're entering a new era, and it's time to build a foundation that lasts beyond any one person. The team was silent for a few moments, but then Gwyn spoke up. Elon, whatever you decide, we're behind you. You've always been the driving force behind these companies, but you've also built incredible teams. We'll make sure Tesla and SpaceX keep pushing forward. Elon smiled, a sense of calm washing over him. He knew it wasn't going to be easy, but he also knew that sometimes, the hardest choices were the ones that led to the greatest growth. The next morning, Elon made his decision. He would not step down, but he would begin transitioning his role as CEO of Tesla. He had a plan. He would hand the reins over to someone who shared his vision and could carry it forward. He wasn't abandoning his company, he was ensuring its future. In that moment, Elon Musk felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. The weight of the world wasn't entirely lifted, but the path forward had never been clearer. The decision had been made. It was no longer just a dream or a distant hope, it was the beginning of a new era for both Tesla and SpaceX. Elon Musk, always the visionary, had spent countless hours thinking about this moment. It was hard for him to admit, but the time had come to step back from the CEO role at Tesla. His mind raced with thoughts of legacy, of what this transition meant for the future of his companies. He knew he would still play a key role, but it was clear that the next phase of his life and career required a shift. The first step was finding the right person to take the lead at Tesla. Elon had built the company from the ground up, and the thought of handing it over to someone else was terrifying. But he knew that in order for Tesla to truly fulfill its potential, it needed a leader who could handle the pressures of day-to-day operations while continuing to push the envelope in terms of innovation and sustainability. He thought back to a conversation he had had with Gwyn Shotwell not long before. You know, it's not about you, Elon, she had said. It's about the company. You've made it a symbol of what the future can look like. But if you're really serious about Mars, about space, you need someone to take over the reins at Tesla so that your vision can expand beyond Earth. And I think you've already created the foundation for that to happen. It had been hard to hear, but Gwyn was right. As much as it pained him to admit it, SpaceX needed his undivided attention. The Mars mission was just beginning to take shape, and the next few years would be pivotal in determining whether humanity could take the first steps toward becoming a multiplanetary species. Elon gathered his executive team at Tesla headquarters the following morning. The atmosphere was charged with uncertainty. Rumors had started to spread about the upcoming change in leadership, and the team had sensed that something was coming. But no one had anticipated the magnitude of the decision Elon was about to announce. He walked into the conference room with a calm demeanor, his gaze sweeping over the familiar faces of his most trusted leaders. It was time to break the news. I've made a decision, Elon began, his voice steady but carrying the weight of 1,000 thoughts. As you all know, the pressures of managing both Tesla and SpaceX have been growing. We've made tremendous progress, but in order for Tesla to continue its growth and ensure that the mission of sustainable energy doesn't lose momentum, we need to make some changes. He paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. His team exchanged looks, sensing what was coming. I'll be stepping down as CEO of Tesla. I've chosen to transition my role to someone who can focus on the company's day-to-day operations and continue the work we've started. It's time for me to fully dedicate myself to SpaceX and the future we're building with the Mars mission. There was a stunned silence in the room. No one spoke for a few moments, processing what Elon had just said. He wasn't just stepping down temporarily, He was handing over the keys to Tesla to someone else, someone who would lead the company into its next phase. After what felt like an eternity, Tom, the head of Tesla's engineering division, spoke up. "Elon, are you sure? You've been the heart and soul of Tesla for so long. What happens to the mission we've been working on?" Elon nodded. "I'll still be here. I'll be a part of the strategic decision-making process, but I won't be involved in the day-to-day operations. I trust you all to continue the work we've started. Tesla is more than just me, it's about the mission. And we have the best team in the world to carry that forward." The room was still tense, but the weight of the decision was slowly starting to settle. The executives knew that this wasn't the end of their journey with Elon, it was just a new chapter. But still, the idea of moving on without their founder at the helm was daunting. "We've been talking about succession planning for a while now," Elon continued. "I'm confident in the leadership team we've built, and I've been working with the board to identify a new CEO. We'll announce the decision soon." Later that day, Elon called a meeting with the Tesla board of directors to finalize the transition plan. He had already spoken with the board members individually, and while many were surprised, they all agreed that this change was necessary. Elon was right, it wasn't just about him. The company had outgrown him in many ways, and the future of Tesla, like the future of SpaceX, was bigger than any one person. After a long discussion, they all agreed on a candidate, Robin Denholm, who had been Tesla's chairwoman for several years. Robin had the experience and vision to lead the company while staying true to the mission of sustainability that Elon had built Tesla around. Elon knew she was the right choice. A few days later, the announcement was made. Elon Musk would remain with Tesla as a major shareholder and advisor, but he was stepping down as CEO. The news sent shockwaves through the business world, but it was clear that Elon's decision was one made with the long-term health of Tesla in mind. The press conference was a whirlwind. Reporters flooded the room, eager for answers, eager to know what this meant for Tesla's future. Elon sat beside Robin Denholm, who was now the new CEO of Tesla, ready to answer the flood of questions that would undoubtedly come. "Elon, why now? Why step down?" a reporter asked. Elon smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about this," he said. "Tesla is in a strong position, and we've made incredible progress. But the Mars mission is the future of humanity, and it's something I have to fully commit to. Tesla needs a leader who can focus on the company's daily operations and continue the work we've started. Robin is the right person to lead Tesla into the next phase." Robin took a moment to speak, her tone confident and calm. "I am honored to take on this role and carry forward Elon's vision. Tesla is not just a car company, it's a movement, a revolution in the way we think about energy and transportation. We will continue to innovate and push the boundaries of what's possible. The mission of sustainability remains as strong as ever." As the press conference concluded, Elon felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had made the right choice. The future of Tesla was secure, and now he could give his full attention to SpaceX, to the dreams of interplanetary travel, to the future of humanity. He knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something even bigger. And for the first time in a long while, Elon Musk felt a sense of peace about what lay ahead. The weeks that followed the announcement were a whirlwind for both Elon Musk and the teams at Tesla and SpaceX. The news of Elon stepping down as CEO of Tesla had caused waves in the business world, but as the days passed, it became clear that his decision was not a surrender. Instead, it was a calculated move to ensure the companies continued their missions in the most effective way possible. With Robin Denholm now at the helm of Tesla, the company began adjusting to the new leadership dynamic, while Elon's focus shifted more fully to SpaceX. For Elon, this was a critical moment. The future of humanity was no longer a distant possibility, it was unfolding before his eyes. SpaceX was closer than ever to sending humans to Mars, and the pressures of ensuring the success of the mission weighed heavily on him. But with the burden of Tesla's day-to-day management now lifted from his shoulders, he could finally give SpaceX the attention it deserved. It was late one evening when Elon found himself in the SpaceX Mission Control Center, his mind buzzing with excitement and exhaustion. The team had just completed another successful test flight of the Starship prototype, and the countdown to the first crewed mission to Mars was drawing nearer. The room was filled with engineers, scientists, and mission specialists, all focused on the task at hand. There was an electric energy in the air, a sense that history was on the verge of being made. Elon looked around the room, his gaze settling on his team, each person with a sense of purpose and determination that matched his own. There was no denying the magnitude of the mission before them. They were preparing to send humans to another planet. It wasn't just a dream, it was a reality that was quickly taking shape. For a moment, Elon allowed himself to pause and reflect on the journey that had brought him here. It felt surreal, almost impossible, to think back to the early days of SpaceX. The countless failures, the near bankruptcies, the skepticism from the outside world, all of it had led to this moment. The first human mission to Mars was no longer just an ambition, it was an inevitability. And the vision that had driven him for so many years was about to become a defining part of history. "Elon, we're ready for the final pre-launch tests," Gwynne Shotwell said, walking up to him. "This is it. We've got the crew prepped, the hardware's locked, and we're ready to make history." Elon nodded, his eyes never leaving the control center. He could feel the weight of the responsibility, but he also felt an overwhelming sense of pride. This was why he had pushed so hard for so long. The legacy of SpaceX was no longer just about rockets, it was about paving the way for humanity's future in space. "I know we are," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Let's make sure we're doing it right. We're not just launching a mission, we're opening the door for the next generation of explorers. This is about more than just us. It's about all of humanity." The next few weeks were a blur of preparation and testing. Elon and the SpaceX team worked tirelessly to ensure that everything was in place for the Mars mission. There were setbacks, of course, every space mission came with its challenges, but Elon never wavered. He was all in, determined to make the mission a success no matter the cost. Tesla, meanwhile, continued to thrive under Robin's leadership. Her calm and steady hand had guided the company through the initial transition, and the results were already evident. Tesla's stock had surged, and their expansion into new markets was moving faster than expected. The autonomous driving system was making incredible strides, and the company was on track to roll out new vehicle models that would continue to disrupt the automotive industry. Elon was proud of what Tesla had become, and he knew that Robin would take it even further. His decision to step back had been the right one, but it didn't mean he was completely disconnected. He was still a part of the company's strategic vision and continued to provide input when needed. But his role had evolved into something that allowed him to focus on the mission that had always been closest to his heart, space exploration. It was the night before the launch, and Elon found himself standing on the observation deck of the SpaceX facility, looking out over the launch pad where Starship stood, ready for the historic journey. He wasn't alone, Gwynne had joined him, and together they silently watched the rocket in the distance, bathed in the glow of the lights around the pad. "This is it," Gwynne said, her voice soft but filled with awe. "Tomorrow, we make history." Elon nodded, his thoughts momentarily drifting back to Earth. He thought about his family, his children, and the legacy he was building, not just for them, but for all of humanity. There had been times when he doubted himself, when he wondered if it was all worth it. But standing there, on the precipice of something so monumental, he knew that everything had led to this moment. "This is more than just a launch," Elon said quietly. "It's the beginning of something bigger. This is about securing the future of our species." Gwynne smiled. "You've always said that. It's why you've kept going, even when the world said it was impossible." Elon looked over at her, a smile tugging at his lips. "I think it's starting to look less impossible." The launch the next morning was flawless. As Starship soared into the sky, leaving behind a trail of fire and smoke. Elon felt a rush of emotions, exhilaration, pride, and even a touch of disbelief. This was the moment he had dreamed of for so many years. Humanity had just taken its first step toward becoming a multiplanetary species. The mission was a success, and the crew aboard Starship was safely on its way to Mars. The world watched in awe as the spacecraft accelerated into the vast expanse of space, taking humanity one step closer to the stars. Weeks later, Elon sat at his desk at SpaceX, reflecting on the journey. The Mars mission was progressing as planned, and he had just received an update on Tesla's latest achievements under Robin's leadership. The future was bright, not just for his companies, but for the world. He had come full circle. The man who had once struggled to keep his companies afloat was now on the verge of changing the course of human history. Elon Musk had built something extraordinary. Tesla was revolutionizing the way the world thought about energy, and SpaceX was opening the door to the stars. And yet, as he looked out the window, the vastness of space calling to him, he knew the journey was just beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?